Amish Widow's Heart. Copyright 2024 by Samantha Price. All rights reserved. Chapter 1. Seek the Lord and His strength. Seek His face continually. 1 Chronicles chapter 16 verse 11. Andrew Miller paced up and down the floorboards in his living room. The sun had just peeped over the horizon, yet he was dressed and ready. The same as the last few mornings, he was off to call on his recently widowed neighbor, the beautiful Lizzy Lehman. He'd wept when he heard that John Lehman had died. It was the first time Andrew had cried as an adult. He felt the pain Lizzy Lehman would have felt. She loved her husband dearly, and their twins were only 3 years old. John's sudden death had shocked and saddened the whole community. Still, God had wanted him home, and only he could understand why. Andrew was their closest neighbor, and he and Lizzy had been good friends once upon a time. That was why he wanted to be there for her. To help her and her young boys, but he'd always had problems communicating with women. Lizzy had always understood him, though. He ran a hand through his hair and stopped pacing long enough to look at the clock on the mantel. No. Still way too early for him to visit. Every other morning he'd gone between 9 and 9:15, and she'd been up and awake, so better he stick to that. She'd seemed pleased to see him, and always thanked him politely for the goods he'd brought. In her eyes, though, he was just another member of the community bringing her food and being sympathetic. He knew that. His heart nearly stopped. What would he take today? Bread. He'd bake bread. Perfect. That would fill the time nicely, too. He had never cared for bread making or other kinds of cooking, but before he left home, his mother insisted he should learn to make bread at the very least since he didn't have a wife. She'd once told him he'd be a single man forever if he didn't become more bold and outgoing with Lizzy. He hadn't believed her words that day, but they'd come back to haunt him. She'd been right. He washed his hands, thinking about the cooking process. It wasn't that difficult. It was following a set of instructions just like anything else. He knew his bread wasn't the best tasting in the world, but when his large and echoing house was filled with the smell of fresh bread, it made the place feel like a proper home. As he mixed the dough, his mind was drawn back to long ago when he found out that Liz and John were to marry. They'd courted in secret and had told no one. It was so often the way with Amish young folk, but the news had blindsided him. His heart broke that day, and he threw himself into making plans for his life as a single man. Gone were the ideas of having a family and building a happy home. He'd had other opportunities, and those women had been nice enough, but none of them were like his Lizzy. He didn't feel comfortable with any of them. It wasn't merely Lizzy's looks that had him mesmerized, it was everything about her. The way her deep hazel eyes lit up when she laughed, the way she clenched her jaw when she was nervous, the way she walked, like a swan gliding across a pond. He knew every freckle on her pretty face, and he'd been in love with each one. Soon after hearing the news of the impending marriage, he moved out of his parents' home and turned his attention to sheep farming like his grandfather before him. He purchased a farm, having no idea what would happen next. It wasn't the best idea he'd ever had if he wanted to forget her, because 6 months after Liz and John married, they bought the very farm next door to him. By that time he'd had too much work and money invested in the place to move, so he stayed and kept to himself. Chapter 2. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? Psalm chapter 27 verse 1. Mom. Lizzy Lehman opened one eye. Time to wake, Caleb said. Her 3-year-old twin boys stood staring at her, waiting for her to get out of bed. Abe sucked his thumb while his fingers curled around the corner of his blanket. With Abe's mouth occupied, Caleb did the talking as usual. Right now she'd trade anything for another hour's sleep, or perhaps to sleep and never wake again. No, she couldn't think like that. She had to keep going for her boys, and for the livestock that now depended on her. There were always a dozen other chores to do before noon. Thankfully, her brother-in-law had arranged for the workers to fill in for John by doing more hours, and he was talking about putting an extra worker on. Her duties revolved around making the small goods sheep's milk and goat's milk yogurt and cheese. She hadn't been able to do much while arranging the funeral and entertaining the many guests who visited daily. It went undone, and after taking 2 quarts a day for the household, all the milk was currently being sold. Mom's awake." She smiled at their cuteness. It had been 2 days since they'd stopped asking where their father was. They'd each asked twice, and while she'd hesitated, trying to give them a thorough explanation, explaining that he wasn't coming back because he couldn't, her mother spoke over the top of her. Their grandmother told them their father was in heaven. It seemed to satisfy them, for now. They hadn't asked again. She sat up and patted the bed next to her, and they both climbed up for a morning cuddle. Abe never took the thumb from his mouth, or was it the blanket? It was hard to tell what was going on. All she knew was that he wouldn't sleep without Blanky. Then she put her head back down on the pillow. Just a couple more minutes sleep. It was a nice thought, but with the twins bouncing around and shaking her, it was easier just to get out of bed. "Get up," Caleb said with laughter ringing in his voice. Liz put her legs over the side of the bed and then sat up. "Okay. Look, I'm up." They both smiled. "I'll get your breakfast in a minute. As soon as I change my clothes. Look at you two, still in your pajamas. Go put on your day clothes." She pulled Abe's thumb out of his mouth so he could speak. "Okay, Mom." Then the thumb went back in. "Soon," Caleb said. "Do it, Caleb. Now." Liz put her hands on her hips and stared at Caleb. He got off the bed with his brother, and they both ran away giggling. The first thing Liz did was open her window to allow in the fresh air. With the sun this hot so early, the day was going to be a scorcher. Unusual for March. She looked out the window and saw the grazing sheep on the side of a grassy slope. She knew the goats were in one of the pastures that had been planted to suit their particular tastes. It saddened her heart that she'd never stand side by side with her husband to enjoy this same morning view like they had so many times before. Not far from the meadow was the pond. It was framed with daisies that had cheerful sunflower yellow hearts, and a family of ducks had made it their home. Surrounded by such beauty, it should have been hard to feel low, but that was how she felt. Part of her had died with John. For the twins' sake, she was trying to be positive, trying to be happy the best she could. It wasn't easy. For her boys, she'd have to adjust to living life without John. "Mom. Mom." She turned around to see Caleb dragging Abe back into the room. On seeing the attempt they'd made at dressing, she couldn't help but laugh. Caleb had his shirt on backwards, and Abe, having discarded Blanky, had only gotten one leg in his trousers and was now struggling to put the other one in. Liz stopped laughing and tried to keep the smile from her face, not wanting them to think she was laughing at them. "I'm proud of you both for trying so hard. You're nearly there." She leaned down and pulled on their clothes properly, securing their fasteners and spreading out the uncooperative trouser leg so Abe could put his leg through. "There. All done." Caleb pointed at her. "Now you get dressed, Mom." She looked down at her cotton nightdress. "I will. You both play in your room. I'll only be a minute, and as soon as I change, we can eat." "I'm hungry now, Mom." "I know. Me too. It won't take me long. Off you go." They turned around and walked out of her room, and she closed the door behind them. Liz took a few steps and looked into the only mirror in the house. It sat atop her tall walnut chest of drawers. Stepping closer while hoping the vision that faced her was a trick of the light, her fingertips touched her face. It had nothing to do with the poor morning light. Her skin was sallow and pale, dark circles hung under her eyes like dark crescent moons, a side effect of the sleepless nights. She touched her dark hair, and her fingers unconsciously started undoing the side braid that she always wore over one shoulder at night to prevent her long hair getting snarled. Once her hair was loose, she ran her fingers through to undo any tangles, picked up her brush and carefully pulled it through her hair. Knowing the twins would soon be knocking at her door, she sped up and divided her hair into two and braided it. After using clips to fasten the braids around her head, she opened her closet and picked her brightest dress, hoping that would make her feel more awake and ready to greet the day. She put it on, followed by her apron. Then she pulled on her stockings and lace-up shoes. Lastly, she settled her prayer cap over her hair and tied the strings at the back. Today she'd most likely have visitors. Again. She'd had visitors every single day since the funeral. It seemed everyone in the community had visited with kind words and brought her food. With a longing last look at the bed, she sighed and straightened the covers. She opened the door, walked out of the room, and closed the door behind her. The twins needed their mom, and she needed to be strong. They were all that mattered now. She walked into the twins' bedroom. They jumped to attention, both looking up at her with their bright green eyes. They were the exact color of John's eyes. It seemed as though part of him was looking back at her. Part of him lived on. It was painful and yet comforting. Let's get something to eat. Yeah, food, Caleb said. Yeah, food, Abe echoed. She walked them downstairs, and they entered the kitchen, her favorite room in the house, and the twins ran to sit down at their tiny table and chairs that John had made for them. The light flooded in from the tall, mostly glass French doors beside the main table. No one else in the community had doors like that or windows so tall. He'd insisted on having them this way so they could gaze out at their farm. Everywhere she looked, there were reminders of John because he'd designed and built the house for them. She poured the boys cups of milk, and while they drank it, she grabbed the egg carton and the fry pan and went through the motions of daily life. The milk was in the gas-powered fridge already. Since John had died, one of the workers let himself in each morning to leave 2 quarts of milk in the fridge. She'd given the boys their eggs, and just as she was spooning scrambled eggs onto her own plate, she heard a buggy. It was too early for visitors. It couldn't have been the workers because they'd started hours ago. Then she remembered it was Friday, and her mother had insisted on coming today and staying with her for as long as was needed. You two stay there. I'll see who's here. I think it's Mammy. She's coming to stay for a few days. Can I come see too? Caleb asked. No. Both of you stay. She opened the front door and saw the familiar, long-legged dark bay horse with the wide blaze down his nose. Matthew had driven her mother in his buggy. Matthew was John's brother, and more recently he had become her sister's fiancé. John had secretly predicted that would happen, but Liz wondered whether it had been based on a feeling or whether Matthew had whispered something to him of his attraction to Lucy. Before her mother could climb out, Matthew hurried to the other side to help her. He was such a decent man and a lot like John. Lizzy. Her mom had spotted Liz at the door. Liz waved at her and walked out to greet her. Hello Mom, thanks for coming to stay. Marie looked up at her and adjusted her thick wire-rimmed glasses. Come closer, Lizzy. Are you okay? Liz had told her for years to call her Liz rather than Lizzy. Her mother paid her no mind and always called her Lizzy. I'm doing okay. I'm sure she's doing as well as she can be. How are you, Liz? Fine. And hello to you, Matthew. Thank you for bringing Mom here. My pleasure, Liz. Anything you need anytime, just ask, Matthew answered. Her mother reached for her and pulled her in tight for a hug. For a short woman, she had a strong grip. Liz gasped for air as she stepped back. I'm fine, Mom. Come in, breakfast is cooking. I hope you're both hungry. Yeah, I could do with a bit of breakfast, thank you, Liz, Matthew replied as he brought Marie's large suitcase out of the back of the buggy. As they walked inside, Liz wondered how Matthew was doing since he'd lost his only sibling. They'd never really talked about it. He'd just told her he'd be there to help her with anything she needed, but what about him? Men were too good at trying to appear strong. John and Matthew had been as close as brothers could be. Both were handsome men, and the only difference was their eyes. Matthew's were brown and John's had been green. As Matthew stepped into the house behind them, he placed the bag down on the floor. Liz could see it was heavy as well as being large. How long was Mom planning to stay? She'd said days, but that was vague. Having her mother stay was both good and bad. She was as helpful as she was overbearing. It would be a balancing act. Where will I put this? He asked, nodding at the bag. Oh, in the last room to the left. He picked it up and started walking. Matthew had visited every Thursday night for cards and enjoyed volleyball with their other friends if John had spare time on the weekends. Matthew had often helped John with the sheep and goats when he'd been between jobs. It wasn't the kind of work he liked. He preferred his construction work. Boys, it's Mammy. Mammy, Abe called out. She walked over and kissed them both on the tops of their heads, causing them to laugh. Then they kept eating. While Mammy sat down and Liz pulled more eggs from the refrigerator, Uncle Matthew walked into the kitchen. Uncle Matthew! Uncle Matthew, the twins screamed. Hi there, little ones, Matthew said as he sat down on one of their little chairs. They both giggled with delight at his silliness. Oh, Matthew. You're not a child. Sit at the big table with the adults, Marie said. Matthew ruffled their hair one at a time, before he moved to sit in front of his future mother-in-law. Liz hadn't had a chance to walk back to the kitchen before the shots began firing. Liz, what will you do now that John is gone? Who is going to take care of the farm? Marie stared at her wide-eyed. I don't know, Mom. I haven't had a chance to think it through yet. Now you both sit, I'll get you coffee and then I'll put on some eggs. I've got Bob Whitford and James Yoder doing extra time, Matthew told Marie as they both sat down at the table. Thank you for arranging all that, Matthew. Liz poured out 2 cups of coffee from the jug and placed them down on the table. She was pleased Matthew was there as a buffer between her and her mother. Yeah, that's right, and then I'll be able to do more soon. I'm thinking you might need another part-time worker, Liz. Yeah, you mentioned that before. Do whatever you think. I'll talk to Bob and James later this afternoon and see how they're doing with everything. Thank you, Matthew. That would be great. And what about the twins? Marie asked. They need some sort of security. Liz cracked eggs into a bowl. Her mother must be worried about the money going out in extra wages. I know, Mom. I don't want to waste money on extra workers, but I just need a little time before I throw myself into making the cheese and yogurt again. It's hard with the twins. That's why I'm so pleased you've come to help. That kept her mother quiet for a moment. Liz looked over at Matthew. He looked concerned. She'd rarely seen him so serious. He was the one always ready with a joke and a laugh. What was he worried about? Was he keeping something from her? She couldn't ask in front of her mother. Marie slurped her coffee and then put the mug back on the table. I can take care of the twins and you can work on the farm, but it's not a woman's job. I won't be around forever. I'm not a young woman. You have to think about the twins, and right now I think you need to be looking for another husband or you will lose the farm. Why would you say that? There's no danger of that. It makes sense. You've had to pay out so much more since John's been gone. When you have a farm, dear Lizzy, the idea is to have more money coming in than going out. She shook her head vigorously, then ended by adjusting her glasses. If things keep sliding. No. Liz looked at her twins. They were busy eating and were, to her relief, paying the adults no attention. The farm will be fine. I can learn to do it all, and the boys can take it over when they're grown. In a few years, there'll be many things they'll be able to do to help out. Marie threw her hands up in the air. I don't see another way. There are plenty of widowers to choose from. Now's not the time. She frowned at her mother, hoping the displeasure on her face would be enough to silence her. Her husband died a week ago, his funeral was the day before yesterday, and her mom was telling her to find another husband, and doing it in front of John's brother? She was unbelievable, and it was totally unacceptable. I won't lose the farm, Mom. The farm's doing well. It's always done well. That's not what I heard. Before she could even think of a suitable reply, Matthew said, I'm confident that you will make it work, Liz. I'm here for you and the children. You're not alone, and you will always have help from the community as well. She studied Matthew's face as she whisked eggs with a little milk. Was there any truth in what her mother had just said? If there was, Matthew would be the one to know about it. Is that why she was talking about another husband? There had to be a reason for her mother to speak like that. I appreciate that, Matthew. Yes, she appreciated his words, but soon he'd have his own family to look after. She looked at her mother. There are many solutions to my situation. Marriage of convenience, or for any other reason, won't be one of them. She looked at her boys, pleased they were too young to understand the conversation taking place in their presence. Her mother opened her mouth in shock and was just about to speak when a knock sounded at the door. Liz closed her eyes. Thank you, God. Happy to be getting out of the conversation, she excused herself and hurried to the door. When she opened it, she saw her closest neighbor, Andrew Miller, with a basket in his hand. She'd never been more pleased to see his friendly and handsome face. He'd visited every day since John had died, bringing her various kinds of food and beverages. Over the years she hadn't seen much of him, despite him living so close and their past close friendship. She looked into his face, and as always, it brought back memories of happier days when they were both a lot younger. As they stood there smiling, Liz couldn't help noticing his eyes matched the blue of the sky behind him. With his eyes and his light brown hair with blonde streaks, he was like a ray of light that God sent to brighten her day. "Hello, Andrew. It's good to see you." "Hello, Liz?" Then the smile left his face, but he didn't stop looking directly at her. "I wanted to explain why I wasn't at the funeral. I should have explained myself before now." He only attended the meetings, and never went to the charity events or even the weddings. He'd become a loner, and she didn't know why. No explanation necessary. The life of a farmer is busy. "I understand." "No, it's not that. It's fine, really. You don't have to say anything. I'm so sorry for your loss. I hope I'm not being a bother coming here like this, so early and unannounced." He was funny, and she almost laughed at him speaking so properly. "It's fine. I enjoy you coming here. I only wish you'd stay for at least a cup of coffee." He glanced at the visiting buggy. "I can see you have people here. I just wanted to check in once again and make sure you and the children are okay." "That's very kind of you, Andrew. I'm fine. Thank you. I have my mother come to stay with me for a few days." She hoped it wasn't longer. Mom was already making the large house feel so small, and if she started in again about her marrying, Liz would have to tell her to stop even if she sounded rude. He handed over the basket. "I brought some fresh lemonade I just made and some bread freshly baked. I hope you and the twins will like it." "That's very kind of you, Andrew. Would you like to come in for some breakfast? I've just made some eggs and I'll be making more." "I must get back to work." "Okay. Come in while I unpack this and I'll give the basket back to you." He raised his hands. "Keep it. I have plenty. My aunt weaves them and I have too many." "Thank you, I will. It's a fine basket. It'll come in handy. I don't want to be pushy, but I'm always here if you need anything. Help with the farm or anything else." She nodded. For Liz, it was the worst feeling ever to be dependent upon people. "That's kind of you. I certainly will ask, but I think I'll be fine. We'll be fine." "Good to hear." He gave her a polite nod and then turned and walked down the steps. "Bye, Andrew," she called after him. He stopped, turned around and gave her a wave. "Bye, Liz." She closed the door, thinking he was so pleasant but a little odd. He was so incredibly shy that he forgot to say goodbye. Despite many women trying to know him better, he'd chosen to remain single. He had to have chosen it, with all the women who'd been interested in him over the years. Her mother was the one who'd kept her up to date with all the gossip. Chapter 3. Judge not, and ye shall not be judged. Condemn not, and ye shall not be condemned. Forgive, and ye shall be forgiven. Luke chapter 6 verse 37. "You're a dumbcoff," Andrew mumbled under his breath as he walked away from the house. Why couldn't he be more confident? More like John? She obviously liked men who took charge and were bold. That was why he'd never gotten anywhere with her years ago. He should have told her how he felt and what he wanted for their future. If he'd done that, he might not have lost her. If she had said no, that would have been fine. Well, not exactly fine, but at least he could have asked. Now he had to live every day not knowing what might have been. Fear of her rejecting him had held him back. What was the use? He could see in her eyes she was only being polite. Her eyes were lifeless and a tiny bit cold. She was looking at the world but not really seeing it, just like she'd never seen him, not really. The best he could hope for was a friendship like they once had. He'd give anything to have that kind of relationship with her again, but he couldn't turn back the clock. Whatever opportunities he'd missed were too long in the past. Some opportunities, like love, could never be recaptured. Like an unexpected tornado, she'd gone down a path with John and had left him standing there wondering what had happened. To this day he felt he was in that same place, back at that point in time, standing at those same crossroads. 10 lost years of memories they would never share. Time and life kept marching on. Would things have been different if he'd had the courage to tell her he was in love with her? He had thought she knew, but did she? Why had she been spending all that time with him if she didn't love him? With all the time she'd spent with him, when were she and John courting? All these questions had tormented him over the years, going around and around in his head until he could barely take it. He'd become a master at blocking Lizzy from his mind. He'd had plenty of practice at that. Andrew walked up the steps of his porch and sat down on one of the chairs. The chores could wait a minute or two while he cleared his head. Years ago he should never have taken what Liz and he had for granted and made grand assumptions. If he'd learned anything in life, it was to learn the lessons life was shouting at him. When you have something to say, say it. Don't let overthinking get in the way. Keep things simple. What to do next? He felt so sorry for Liz and her children. Even if Liz and he never became close again, he had to do everything in his power to help her and her children, and keep them all happy. Liz took the basket into the kitchen, only to find her mother in the process of cooking the eggs. She set the basket down. "Thank you, Mom." That was Andrew from next door. Matthew moved out of his chair. "What have you got there?" Before she could answer, he was looking over her shoulder. "Oh, some lemonade and some freshly baked bread." Liz touched the bread with her fingertips. "It's still warm and it looks all toasty and crusty on the outside, and that's just how I like it." Her mother dished out the scrambled eggs. "You can butter that bread right now, Matthew." "What would you do if he hadn't brought the bread over, Lizzy?" "I see that there's no bread in the bread bin, just a sliver of a crust, and it looks days old." "I already put it in the scrap food for the chickens." There was bread yesterday," Liz remarked, feeling bad. "Everyone seems to be bringing me meat and vegetables, which is lovely and so kind, but I haven't had the time to bake bread for several days." "Wake up earlier then. You never were an early riser, and now you'll need to be." As much as her mother's words annoyed her, she knew Mom was right. "Now sit down and I'll bring this over as soon as we have the bread buttered." As she sat down, one of the boys asked, "Bread for me too?" "Yeah, we won't forget the both of you," Mammy said. "Coming up," Matthew told them. Liz waited for her food, grateful the boys were so young. It would break her heart if they were at an age where they would have understood they'd never see their father's face again in this life. They were always so happy, so full of life, and she never wanted that to change. For their sakes, it would be good if they had a man in their lives, one who loved them as much as she did. But she couldn't even think about that, and she couldn't do it even for them. She wished her mother had never mentioned the idea. If she knew her mother, it wouldn't stop there. Once her mother had something on her mind, she was as relentless as a dog with a bone. No sooner than they were all seated, her mother started again. "What about Andrew?" Liz frowned. "What about him?" "He has a successful farm, not too hard on the eyes either with those broad shoulders of his." "Mom." Liz was embarrassed and looked over at Matthew. Whatever would he think of their family talking about things like that? "I'm just facing facts and you should too. You've been protected too long. You don't know what's what." "The eggs look mighty fine," said Matthew, wisely not looking up from his eggs. "Matthew, did you say something?" Marie asked. "I said the eggs look mighty fine. Taste good too. They're simply just eggs beaten with a little milk, salt and pepper added, and then heated in a fry pan." He nodded. "I think he was sweet on you way back when." Marie popped a forkful of egg into her mouth. Liz frowned. "Who was?" "Your neighbor, but he wasn't your neighbor then." "Yeah, the eggs are good, Mom." "I know you don't want it said, and especially not in front of Matthew, but if I don't talk with a witness in the room, you'll tell me to mind my own business." Matthew laughed. "I've never been called a witness before. You two are quite funny." Marie cackled along with him. The two of them got along far too well. Liz wondered what Lucy thought about that. Once they were married, Marie and Matthew might gang up on her. But then again, the perfect Lucy mostly agreed with Mom anyway. Liz sighed. "Why don't you tell me what you want to say and be done with it? Get it out of your system, and then please respect me by never mentioning it again." Her mother got straight into it. "I was saying before, you don't know how hard things can get. You've never known hunger. Never gone to bed with a pain in the belly, had to eat bread and drippings once a day for weeks. I just don't want you to end up like that. I've no money to keep you and the boys. I can barely keep myself. Oh Mom, why didn't you say anything? You can move in here if things are bad. Yeah Marie, I can help too. Marie ignored Matthew's offer of help. You're not listening, Liz. I don't see how you can do it alone, you're a woman. You can't raise these 2 children, manage the vegetable garden, the chickens, the animals, and run the sheep farm. You need to remarry. It's the only way for a woman, and more so for a woman with children. Not in front of them, Liz whispered, noticing her twins were trying to understand what the adults were talking about. She turned to her boys. As soon as you finish that bread, go up to your room and play, yeah? Okay, Mom. Then I'll come fetch you and we'll do some outside chores together. All this talk was making Liz feel sick. She looked down at the eggs and buttered bread, wondering how she could eat them. Money had always been tight in their household, despite what she'd told her mother. She didn't know their exact financial situation because John never discussed it with her. The food couldn't go to waste, she'd have to try. Her appetite had completely disappeared. Lemonade might help wash it down. As she stood, she asked, "Who wants some lemonade?" "You sit." "I'll get it." Matthew jumped up and brought the pitcher of lemonade to the table with glasses. He poured a little for each of the boys and some for Liz. Liz had a large swallow and it helped settle her tummy. After the boys had their lemonade, they headed upstairs to their room. So well behaved. John would have been pleased about that. Just let me say this, Liz, John would want you to marry again. Look at your miserable face. Do you think he'd want you to be so unhappy? Liz swallowed the mouthful of food she'd forced herself to take. It's only normal. John's funeral was only 2 days ago. Now I have to face life without him. Can't I do that in my own time and in my own way? Mom, I'm grateful that you've come to stay, but I'll help all I can on the farm, Matthew said. Liz smiled at him. She had been just about to say something to her mother that she'd probably have regretted. Thank you. That will be good for now until I figure it all out. Well, you're listening to someone at least. I'm just going to say that you and the children need to be looked after. All this is too much for you, even if you didn't have the 2 boys. Unless you expect the boys to work on the farm. A giggle escaped from Marie's lips, but neither Matthew nor Liz laughed. Matthew added, something needs to be done soon. Decisions need to be made. The longer we sit and think about things, the more debts will add up. Especially with all the extra hours the staff are clocking up. Let me go through the books, Liz. It was too much. Now both of them were at her. If she let him go through the books, it would be another finality. Only John and their bookkeeper had seen those books. She held her stomach and stood up. I think I need some air. Liz, are you okay? You don't look so good. Matthew's face twisted with concern. I'm fine, I just feel a little. You look like you need to lie down. I'll help you to the couch. Matthew wasted no time moving off his chair and holding her arm. I won't lie down. I'll just sit. He helped her out to the couch where she sat. He covered her with the crocheted blanket from the end of the couch and she moved it off. It was far too hot for that. Her mother joined them. I'll open a window. It's a warm day and will only get warmer. Perhaps you're overcome with the heat, Lizzy. Maybe. It's not that hot. It's cool today, Matthew said. Liz knew she had to face facts, as her mother kept saying, and make some practical decisions, but making plans for the future was the last thing she wanted to do. You go back to the table, Matthew. Finish your meal. I'll sit here with Liz. Okay. Once he was gone, Marie moved closer. Now let's talk about your finances. I heard a rumor that John borrowed a lot of money. It was only a rumor, mind you, but where there is smoke, there's often fire. Unless the wood is damp, then there's no fire, but I'm sure my source was a good one. All this talk about fire and smoke was making Liz feel queasy. Her mother should stop listening to gossip. John had never mentioned anything about borrowing money, but the huge new shed they'd built for the ewes and the baby lambs would have cost a fortune. The money had to have come from somewhere. When she'd asked John how he got the money, he told her that she was to look after the household and the children, he'd look after the farm. She didn't ask again. Now she got to thinking she should be the one to look in the books, even though it was the last thing she wanted to do. The last thing she wanted was more bad news. She wasn't a person who coped well with the idea of large debts, and she was pretty sure that was exactly the news she'd find. Liz started to stand, but everything slowly went black. Chapter 4. Forbearing one another, and forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. Colossians chapter 3 verse 13. Next thing Liz knew, she was looking up at the ceiling. Slowly, two faces came into focus, merged into one, and then back out into two. She closed her eyes for a moment, and then opened them again. It was Matthew, her brother-in-law, and her mother. They were staring down at her. Matthew spoke first. "You're awake." She tried to sit up, and her mother helped her. "You fainted," Marie said. "I did." With no strength left, she lay back down. If she closed her eyes, she wouldn't have to face life without John. Then all of a sudden, her stomach churned. She sprang to her feet, and both Matthew and her mother jumped back in shock. Then Liz rushed to the toilet as fast as she could and threw up, only just making it in time. Her mother peeked in the still open door of the indoor bathroom. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" She summoned all of her strength, and still with her face over the toilet, managed to say 2 words. The same 2 words she'd repeated many times daily since John had died. "I'm fine." Then she was sick again. "You're definitely not fine." Marie stood back until she was finished. Then she walked into the bathroom and wet a washcloth. "Here, wash your face, brush your teeth, and then straight up to bed. I will take care of everything here today. Maybe I should lie down. Tell the boys I'm resting." "Of course." Off you go. Once again, not knowing how she would do it alone, and grateful her mom was there, she found the energy to wash her face and rinse her mouth before she made her way to bed. Making it up the stairs was the hardest, but it was worth the climb to flop down on her warm, soft bed. She imagined that John was beside her, and before she knew it, everything faded once more. After her sleep, Liz opened her eyes and noticed the sun was so much weaker and lower in the sky. She must have slept most of the day. It was the afternoon, and the delicious smell of food cooking filled the room. She was no longer sick in the tummy, but as nice as the dinner would be, she wasn't the least bit hungry. While she lay there, she heard the sound of a horse's hooves and buggy wheels crunching the small pebbles in the driveway. This seemed so late for visitors, she wondered if it might be the bishop. Had her mother told him that nonsense about John borrowing money? She forced herself out of bed and peeked out her window, which was directly above the driveway. At first she had no idea who belonged to the dark bay horse with no white markings. He looked the same as so many other buggy horses. Then she saw Amy Willis, the community's midwife, getting out of the buggy. And the pieces fell into place. Her mother thought she was pregnant, and had sent out an urgent call to Amy. Didn't Mom know how much stress she was under? That was why she had fainted. This was only adding to her problems, and might start rumors that she could do without. Still, her mother would not let Amy leave without exploring the idea that she might be pregnant. She knew her mother wouldn't just let it slide, always one to call the midwife as soon as Liz got so much as a little headache, hoping for another grandbaby. She and John had thought it funny, but now it wasn't funny, not at all. Best get this over and done with. As she started to make her way down the stairs to greet Amy, she was met in the middle by her mother, who stood in her way, not willing to let her pass. "No. I don't think so, Missy. Back up into bed until Amy has attended to you." Amy appeared at the bottom of the stairs and gave a little wave. "Hello, Amy. Mom called you." "She did. I'm sorry you've come all this way for nothing. I'm feeling fine now." "Really?" Amy didn't say anything, just smiled while Marie made shooing motions with her hands. Liz turned around and went back up to her room. "Where are Abe and Caleb?" "Lucy has taken them for the day, and she'll keep them overnight." "Oh, really?" Her sister never helped out. "That's good of her. It's the least she could do with you so ill. She loves her nephews." As soon as they were all in Liz's room, Amy took a box out of her bag. "I'm going to take your blood pressure to start with." "So you think I'm pregnant?" Liz asked her mother as she held out her arm to Amy, now wondering if that was a possibility. "That's what Amy is here to find out." Amy strapped the band on Liz's arm. Your mother tells me you weren't feeling too good last night or this morning. She looked up at her mother. She wasn't even here last night. I have been quite stressed since John's passing and quite upset. Surely that's to be expected. I had no warning. He was fine one minute and gone the next. If he'd been sick, I would have had time to get used to the idea, but to be completely okay and then he's gone. I understand. I'm ever so sorry. That would be hard. She pumped her handheld blood pressure machine and they all looked at the dial anxiously. Blood pressure is in the normal range. A little on the high side, but we'll keep a close eye on it. Marie said, examine her. See if she's pregnant. Amy ignored her and put her blood pressure equipment back in its box. Then she pulled out a small jar with a yellow lid and handed it to Liz. Can you give me a sample? Okay. After a moment, Liz came back from the toilet and handed Amy the sample container. Amy took it from her, went over to the window and put a paper stick into it. Please God, please, Marie said aloud. Liz sat on the bed with her hands underneath her. She and John had wanted another child. Perhaps a girl, she'd thought after having the 2 boys. Neither of them had said they wanted a girl, but it was only natural to want at least one of each. Now she couldn't even pray, didn't know what to think. Her mother walked over and started talking to Amy in a low voice. Then the reality of it all hit Liz. She couldn't do this. She couldn't raise 3 children without John. It would be hard enough with 2. Not only that, she had the farm to run, and that had taken John all his time, even with 2 other workers and a little help from her. If she was pregnant, she'd have to sell the place most likely, and she'd have nothing for the boys when they grew up. Farmland in the area was fast disappearing. This land had to be kept for the boys, so they could take it over when they grew up. All she could see in front of her was years of hard work, suffering, and struggle. Closing her eyes, she prayed that she wouldn't be pregnant. Whether that was wrong or not, she didn't know. As nice as another baby would be, her first priority was to look after the boys she had. Surely it wouldn't happen. This couldn't be in God's plan for her. Was all that Amy said. Liz opened her eyes and looked at the midwife's face. You've got the answer? Amy nodded. Marie screamed. Does that mean yes? Amy nodded once more. Liz put her hand to her head. No. I can't be. Are you saying I'm pregnant? Amy smiled. Congratulations. You are. Pregnant? Liz felt her stomach sink. She should have been pleased, but she couldn't do this without him. No, it's impossible, there must be some sort of mistake. Do the test again, could you? Amy frowned at her. Okay. I can do it, but I'll get the same result. Please do it again. Aren't you happy, Liz? Marie asked. I don't know what I am, to be completely truthful. Liz closed her eyes while Amy did another test, and all the while she heard her mother's voice. Mom was talking to her in soft, soothing tones, but Liz wasn't listening to one word. She just let the sounds roll over her like gentle waves. When her mother nudged her in the ribs 3 minutes later, she opened her eyes to see Amy's smiling face. It's time for rejoicing. You are pregnant. Liz let out the breath she was holding. Can't those things be wrong? Surely I need a blood test or something, don't I? Amy shook her head. These days they're very accurate. They measure a hormone in your urine. You are definitely pregnant. Liz's mind went blank. She didn't know what to do, say, or think. She couldn't bear to look at her mother's face right now. You know the routine, Liz. Rest up, eat well, and look after yourself. I'll come to see you again in about a month. If you need me before then, please call. I will. Will it be more twins, Amy? Liz's mouth fell open in shock at her mother's words. Amy chuckled. There's no way I can know that right now, Marie. I have to wait until I can hear heartbeats, unless you want to go for an ultrasound in a couple of months, Liz? No. I don't. I'm sure it's not twins. Marie laughed. A moment ago you were sure it was stress, Lizzy. Amy grabbed her bag. I'll let myself out. Keep calm, Liz. And Marie, you'll be staying on to look after her for a while? I will. I've got all the time in the world. Lucy is at the house and she'll keep things nice while I'm here. Good. Amy gave them both a smile and then headed out the door. Marie walked after her. I'll walk you down. Liz sat in shock as both of them walked out of her room. If John had been alive, it would have been a time for celebration, but now she was numb. This wasn't supposed to happen. Then she heard her mother's heavy footsteps heading back up the stairs. She burst into the room smiling until she saw Liz's face. I don't know, Mom. The farm, the everything. Lately, it's taken all my energy just to look after the boys. It's hard enough without him, and now things will be so much harder. Marie walked over and sat down beside her. It's okay. We'll get through this together. I know I should be pleased and happy, but John's gone. John will never see or hold this child. This child will never know its father. I don't know if Caleb or Abe will even remember him. Be strong. When you're holding the tiny baby in your arms, you will be overjoyed. There'll be no sadness in your heart. Think of this as John's gift to you. You'll soon have 3 children to think about, not just yourself. Thinking sorrowful and emotion-filled thoughts will only lead to heartsickness. My heart is already sick. I know. She put her head on her mother's shoulder and sobbed. For every problem, God has His solution. He'll bring you the answer. Liz held her breath, expecting her mother to add, in the form of a man, but she didn't. I know. Everything will be okay. She wiped her face with her sleeve, glad her mother was finally being a comfort to her. Now let's eat. Are you hungry? I think I can eat a little. It's okay, dear. Marie pulled her into another big hug. Everything will be okay. Shall I call Lucy and have her come here to talk with you and bring the boys back? Didn't you say she was keeping them overnight? She was. Yeah, that's still the best idea. Don't call her just now. I need time to process all this, and I'll talk to her tomorrow when she comes. It'll take me some time to get used to the idea. As you wish. Marie stood and pulled Liz to her feet. Together they walked downstairs. Chapter 5. But I say unto you which hear. Love your enemies. Do good to them which hate you. Luke chapter 6 verse 27. It was early morning when Lucy and the boys bounced into Liz's room. She had hoped she'd have a sleep-in, but that wasn't to be. As the boys clambered up on her bed and hugged her, she sat up. Did you two have a good time with your Aunt Lucy? Yeah, we want to go again, Caleb said. Abe took his thumb and blankie out of his mouth. Yeah. She ruffled their dark hair. Maybe. Soon. She looked over at Lucy as she hugged the boys. You're early. The boys woke early and they were asking for you. I hope you got enough sleep, Liz said. I did. Lucy put her fingertips to her mouth and yawned. I guess I am a little tired. Liz thought her sister was so pretty even the first thing in the morning. Her clothes were neatly pressed, and her light brown hair showed apart precisely in the center in front of her cap. Not one hair seemed out of place. Lucy's attention then turned to Liz's bedroom mirror. She pulled her prayer cap off and rearranged her braids. She placed her cap back on and took a moment to study herself. First one side of her face and then the other. Liz laughed. What are you looking at so closely? Mom won't allow a mirror at home. It's so tiresome, but she says I can do what I want when Matthew and I marry. We will have a mirror in our house. More than one. Then she stopped looking at herself and spun around to face Liz. Mom tells me you're expecting again. I'm so happy to be an aunt again. I know, but it's not good timing, is it, with John gone? Any child at any time is a blessing. I know, you're right. I just worry about how I'll manage the farm and 3 little ones on my own. I haven't even been able to face finding out about our finances. I don't know if we're doing well or not well. I thought we were doing okay, but I've heard some things that make me worry. The more I worry, the more I don't want to look at the books. You have workers, silly. They'll do all the work and you just sit and count up the money. Liz was amused by her sister's youthful enthusiasm. That sounds good, but that's not how it works. John didn't say anything, but now that I look back, he often frowned when he had those ledgers spread out on the kitchen table. We always seemed to have money. He always gave me plenty of money for food when we went into town, never told me we had to be careful. It's all going to work out even if you can't see it now. I just know it. Thank you. That's good to hear, so keep saying it. I really hope so. Lucy leaned in closer to whisper to Liz, "How's Mom been? Has she been pressuring you? Matthew told me that yesterday morning she was saying some things over breakfast about you needing to find husband number 2. Matthew was so shocked. He tells me everything, you know. He felt sorry for you, but it wasn't his place to say anything, so he kept trying to interrupt her when she got too pushy. He said that no one would replace John and he thought you handled Mom well. You weren't rude and neither did you get pushed around. You were firm. That's the best way with Mom. If you don't speak like you're angry, she'll think she can boss you around. I'll try to remember that." Liz was glad she wasn't alone. She expects me to remarry, but I can't. Now she'll be worse. She was saying those things before she knew about this baby. She put her hand over her tummy, her heart now warming to the idea of another baby. Don't let her pressure you into anything you don't want to do. I won't. Thank you, Lucy. Girls, come down for breakfast. The boys have beaten you to it. Marie yelled from downstairs. Liz looked around. Her boys had managed to make it out of her room and downstairs before she'd even noticed. "Coming, Mom," Lucy called out. Then she smiled at Liz. "Come on, I'll help you out of bed. Let's go eat." Liz quickly changed from nightgown into her daytime clothes, and Lucy did her hair in record time. She donned her cap and they threw the bed together. As they made their way down the stairs, Marie came rushing toward Liz, grabbed her as soon as her foot touched the floorboards, and forced her toward the couch. "You need to rest, my dear. Come lie down out here." Marie pushed her onto the couch and pulled a blanket over her. Liz pushed the blanket off. "I just want to see the boys and sit at the table. I'm fine." "No. Amy insisted you rest and that I take care of you." Not having the energy to fight, she obliged. Liz watched through the doorway of the kitchen as Lucy sat at the kitchen table and talked with the twins. The smell of oatmeal and toast filled the air, and today Liz wasn't nauseous at all, but neither was she hungry. Marie came back out and handed Liz a tray with a huge bowl of oatmeal with brown sugar sprinkled on top and a side of buttered toast. "Here you go. Make sure you eat it all. You need to eat as much as possible." "Thank you, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you here. I will always be here for you, and you know I want the best for all of you. Which is why I can't just let this go." She sat heavily beside her, causing the tray to tilt to one side. Liz reacted quickly and balanced it, making it level before anything spilled. "Now more than ever you should be able to see the urgency of getting married. As soon as possible before the little one comes." Liz noticed the intense look in her mother's eyes. She could tell she was more than worried for her and her grandchildren. "I appreciate you worrying about me, but please let me grieve. I've got another little one to bring into the world." Perhaps the easiest way to cope with her mother was to give her the idea she'd think about marriage in the future. That way, they wouldn't be butting heads, and Liz had little energy to argue. "There'll be time for all that later." "My love, that's just it. You don't really have the time." Liz saw Lucy looking over from the table, giving her mother a disapproving look. "Mom, let her rest. John's not long gone and she's only just found out she's pregnant. Let it go." Lucy's tone was surprisingly abrupt. Okay, I've said my part. I love you all. I'm just trying to do a mother's job and offer my advice." Marie gave Liz a kiss on the forehead and made her way back to the table. Their mother had listened to Lucy. At least she listened to someone. Liz looked down at her food. She had to force herself to eat, even if it was just a little. If only she could be more positive and confident about the future. Maybe if she just saw where they were at financially, she could rest easy without the burden of wondering about all that could be wrong. There was a possibility there might be nothing wrong at all. Chapter 6. Confess your faults one to another. And pray one for another that ye may be healed. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. James chapter 5 verse 16. Today, Andrew was heading a couple of towns over to attend a meeting. A group of farmers was gathering to talk about new ideas. One idea in particular that had caught his attention was about smaller farms forming co-ops with other farmers to increase profitability. He'd always been hungry for new ideas and new ways of doing things. All farmers had to do that if they wanted to survive the effects of the cheaper imports and the big corporate farms. He'd gotten up early and done the most necessary things, and then his 2 part-time workers would do the rest. Many of the farmers he knew used their families as workers, and that kept the money within the family, but he did the best he could as a single man. His brothers weren't sheep farmers either. It would have been beneficial to him if they were. His older brother had a dairy farm, and his younger brother was a builder. There was one thing he had to do before he left, and that was take something to Liz. He couldn't help himself, and he hoped she wasn't getting sick of him. If only she'd give him something to do. He wanted to help her, to do more than bringing her bread or lemonade. He knew she was hurting, and he felt so hopeless and helpless seeing her like that. She'd always been so happy and carefree. The times he spent with Liz in their youth were the best days of his life. They had always been drawn to each other, like moths to a light, and maybe she had been drawn to him because she sensed how timid he was back then and she had a motherly instinct. Was that it? He shuddered at the thought, and pulled up happier memories. He'd worked part-time in a bicycle shop, and she was working in her aunt's cake store in those days. He'd driven her home many an evening. That was how it had all started, and then after a couple weeks they wouldn't always go home right away, they'd drive around and talk. Eventually, they'd started to meet on a Saturday afternoon when neither of them was working. That was why it had come as a shock when he heard she was marrying John. He'd thought she was spending all her free time with him. When had she been spending time with John? It was a mystery to him. He never asked anyone, and he never found out. He had a quick wash and then readied himself for the day. He made sure he had a close shave and combed his hair back. Sunday best was what he'd wear to the meeting, black suit with a white shirt. Then he walked into the kitchen, grabbed a cardboard box and filled it with vegetables he'd picked from his garden the evening before. There were too many for him. He always had too much of everything for just one person. Liz could surely use them with her mother staying there, and Matthew and Lucy seemed to be there more often than not these days. Once the box was filled, he took a deep breath and ran through what he would say. Even though Marie had answered the door last time, Liz had been quick to appear. Hopefully that would happen again if Liz wasn't first to the door. He'd give her the vegetables and then go. He couldn't stay anyway, even if she asked, since he had that meeting to get to. An Englisher farmer was driving him and another Amish farmer there. It was too far for a horse and buggy. All the sheep farmers were friendly and helpful to one another. He picked up the box and headed out the door, still talking to himself. Best I don't think about it too much. I'll just say, here, these are for you. I had too much and thought you could use them. Yeah, that is all I need to say. If no one else is about and she doesn't look like she's in a hurry, I could mention the meeting and tell her what it's about. His heart beat hard against his chest as he put one foot in front of another on the way to her door. The thought of talking to her made him nervous. This day was no different from any other. Mostly he was worried about what she was thinking about him. The last thing he wanted to do was make a nuisance of himself. A knock sounded on Liz's door. Lucy looked up. Who could that be? I didn't hear a buggy. Marie smirked and put down her coffee cup. That would be your morning admirer, Liz. Hush, Mom. Liz got up from the table and frowned at her mother. Call him Andrew. Andrew Miller? Lucy asked, sitting up straight, adjusting her cap. I can answer the door for you. Shall we invite him in for coffee or hot tea? No. I'll get the door. Liz left them and opened the door. Andrew, hello. Won't you come and have breakfast with us? My mother and Lucy are here. He shook his head. I won't. I got these from my garden. Way too much for one. I thought you could use them. I know you're getting so many visitors that they might come in handy. Liz smiled. She hadn't heard him say so much in years. He'd blurted out his words as though they'd been rehearsed. That's lovely. I appreciate it. She went to take it from him and he held it away. It's heavy. I'll take it into the kitchen for you. Thank you. He walked into the kitchen ahead of her. Good morning, Mrs. Glick and Miss Glick. "Oh, Andrew, good morning," Marie said. Lucy sprang out of her chair and walked over. "Hello, Andrew. What's that you've got there?" "Vegetables." "Where would you like them, Lizzy?" Marie jumped up too. "You brought vegetables? Wonderful. Just put them on the countertop, anywhere there is space." He put them down. "I always have too much for just one." Then he saw the boys and crouched down with them. "Now who do we have here? You're Abe, aren't you?" "Yeah," Abe laughed. "I'm Caleb and he's Abe," Caleb told him. "You boys are growing so big. You'll be out working on the farm in no time." He then stood up. It was the first time Liz had seen him interact with them. At the meetings, it was always the women who gathered around the children. They'd love that. "They love being outdoors," Liz said. Marie said, "Why don't you come back for dinner tonight? We haven't had a meal with you in ages, not since you and Lizzy were teens. We'd love your company." He shook his head. "I couldn't." Then he chuckled. "I don't want to be a bother. I just want to do what I can to help out." Before Marie could say anything, he was already walking out the door. Again, he hadn't said goodbye. "Bye, Andrew," Lucy called out, but no answer came. Liz quickly followed him and caught up when he was on the porch. "I really appreciate it, Andrew, thank you." He turned and smiled. "Bye, Liz." "Bye." When Liz walked back into the kitchen, she noticed her boys had grown quiet. Normally they were giggling and chatting to each other. She wondered if having a man in the house had reminded them of their father. Then she remembered they didn't have that reaction to their Uncle Matthew, but he'd always been coming and going. "He comes every morning?" Lucy asked. "I think so," Marie answered. "Why wouldn't he come for dinner?" Lucy asked. That was rude, and then he didn't even say goodbye. "No, it wasn't. He didn't want to be a burden. I totally understand. He didn't want a fuss made of him bringing things over here. As far as him not saying goodbye, that's just him. He might not have heard. Your voice is rather soft and quiet." As Liz stood over the box sorting through vegetables, she felt bad that she hadn't tended her own vegetable garden since the dreadful event. It would surely need water, that was, if anything was still alive. She hadn't wanted to ask anyone to water it for her. "Sit down and eat, will you?" Marie asked. "Okay." A loud knock sounded on the front door. Marie looked up. "Who's that?" Liz had only just sat. Thinking it was most likely Andrew again, she jumped up. "I'll get it." She hurried out of the room before her mother or Lucy insisted. Liz was right. Andrew stood at the door with his hat in his hand and his golden brown hair smoothed down and tucked behind his ears. "Have you changed your mind about dinner? My mother will be pleased." He shook his head. "No, it's not that. I'm going to a meeting." "Oh, I noticed you were wearing a suit. It looks nice." He looked down at himself and then looked back up at her. "Thank you. It's a meeting of sheep farmers in the surrounding districts. We're talking about pooling resources with farms close to us. It's all about increasing our profits." She blew out a deep breath. "Oh. It sounds interesting. I probably should go too, but I'm so far behind with everything. I don't even know where to begin. Matthew said he'd help me go over the books, and I'm waiting until he gets the time. I was wondering if you might come too. I should have mentioned it before now, but I guess the timing wouldn't have been right. I would love to hear about what you learn, but maybe in a few weeks when I get sorted. Would that be all right? Things are in a mess right now. I could help." "No, it's okay. Matthew is helping, and the workers are all doing extra. I know I probably have decisions to make, but I can't do anything else at the moment. You know where I am. I better hurry and get home. I've got someone coming to collect me." "Okay." She leaned against the doorpost and watched him leave. There was something about him that made her feel safe and calm. Maybe he reminded her of her younger days when life was more simple. Marie tapped her on the shoulder and caused her to jump. She held her hand over her heart. "Mom, you nearly scared the life out of me." "What were you talking about?" "Just some farming meeting he's going to. He wanted me to come, I think. That's why he was telling me about it." John would have gone. You're not a man to do a farmer's work. You're a woman. Women work inside the house. You're not built to do the farm work, and now with another little one coming, it's going to be impossible for you to do it. Besides, you would have been the only woman at that meeting. I know, but I have to do something about the farm. I have to step up and put myself into John's shoes. There's no other way. I haven't even made the cheese or the yogurt since. She stopped herself from saying more, but it was on her mind every single day that they were paying too much in wages, and because she wasn't making the milk products, only the milk was being sold. A lot more money was made from the small goods. If her mother was right about John borrowing money, they could be in trouble. Chapter 7. But if ye forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. Matthew chapter 6 verse 15. 4 weeks passed and her mother was still at the house helping. For 4 weeks Liz had waited for her brother-in-law to raise the subject of the farm's finances again, but he never had. Liz's life had been a whirlwind and so far she'd avoided looking in those books, but now the day had come. The bookkeeper was coming later today. Then she would find out the truth of their situation. All she knew was that the workers' checks had kept clearing. If they hadn't, she would have heard about it. Liz's morning sickness had come and gone and come again, but in the last few days she'd been fine. She prayed that she was over the nausea. Liz guessed from the size of her growing belly she must be 3 months along already, and that lined up with what Amy, the midwife, told her. The bright light shone in through the half-opened curtains of Liz's bedroom. She awoke to hear laughter and talking coming from the kitchen. That meant her mother had taken the twins downstairs before they had a chance to wake her. For that she was grateful. She loved waking up by herself, and then having the luxury of a few more minutes in her warm bed before facing the day. After a few minutes, her lying in bed turned into her mind blurring into a flurry of fearful thoughts. The best remedy for worry was keeping busy. She'd found that out. She whipped off the quilt and then set about getting changed into her clothes for the day. When she was halfway down the stairs, she heard her mother humming and clanging saucepans about. Marie was already making the twins' breakfast by the sounds. As Liz made her way down the stairs, the smell of bacon and eggs made her sick to her stomach. Then there was the coffee aroma. She loved her coffee except when she was pregnant. For some reason she couldn't drink it or even tolerate the smell right now, and it had taken several months after the twins were born before it smelled or tasted good to her again. When she walked into the kitchen, she headed over to her boys, leaned down and hugged them. "Good morning, to everyone." "Morning, would you like some breakfast?" Marie asked. She straightened up. "No thank you. I can't stand the smell. It's making me want to be sick again." "Go out and sit on the couch." Marie looped her arm through Liz's and despite her protests that she could walk by herself, her mother helped her to the couch. "Sit here and I'll make you some dry toast and a weak cup of hot tea. It's the perfect cure for what ails you." "Thank you." When Marie went back to the kitchen, Liz noticed a letter addressed to Ephraim Schrock. Ephraim Schrock. Surely not the same Ephraim Schrock who once had a crush on her. What was her mother doing writing to Ephraim? The letter wasn't sealed, and she couldn't stop her inquisitive fingers finding their way into the envelope to pull out the letter. Liz unfolded it and read her mother's small curled writing. "Dear Ephraim, I hope this letter finds you well. This is Marie, Liz's mother. Your Aunt Eliza and I attend quilting bees together. We often talk about the young folk, and she tells me you're not yet married. Which brings me straight to the point of my letter. I do hope you don't mind me coming straight out and saying things. I believe the most straightforward and honest approach is best in life. Don't you agree? I'm sure you would. Any thinking person would. Eliza said you wouldn't mind one bit if I write you. I know you were once fond of Liz. I know it because Eliza told me. You might have heard that John, Liz's husband, has died, so a suitable time would need to pass before she could marry again. Mind you, it doesn't need to be too long a wait. At her age, there is no point in wasting time. I'm thinking a 1-year delay would be perfect. If you would be willing to come for the evening meal one time to be reacquainted with Liz, I would be delighted, as I'm sure Liz would be when I tell her." Before Liz got to the end of the horrifying and embarrassing letter, The paper was whisked out of her hands. Liz. It is not polite to open other people's mail, Marie barked. This was it. Liz could take no more. How many times did she have to convince her mother she would not remarry? Don't you know it is rude to not respect my wishes, and to write a letter to some stranger behind my back? And you know you're getting this poor man's hopes up for nothing because I never will remarry. If I wanted to marry him, I would have done it when I had the chance. Marie's bottom lip wobbled. He's not a stranger. You know him. Liz huffed. What was the use? Her mother was impossible. Andrew had been just about to knock when he heard Liz's raised voice. The words rang through his head and pierced his heart. If I wanted to marry him, I would have done it when I had the chance. He turned around and promptly left. As much as he wanted to help her, he'd be lying if he said a spark of hope still lingered in his heart after that. Who said that words couldn't hurt? They could cut to the core and wound someone's very soul. Her words had snuffed out any hope that lingered. He had to face it, she was not interested in him and never would be. She said it so clearly. She wasn't interested then, so it made sense she wouldn't like him now. Sure, she probably liked him as a friend, a good friend, but that was all. It was what he'd expected, but still he couldn't help wishing for more. He looked down at the cake he'd brought and decided to take it home again, hoping and praying he wouldn't be seen. Liz looked at her mother. Why didn't she understand? She'd explained it as simply as she could. What she needed to do was walk outside in the fresh air and clear her head. No, I do not think it's rude of me. You are my daughter and you will remarry or you will lose the farm, and you and I both know it. It's time to face the facts. You can't do this alone. A man needs to step in and take charge of this household. Ouch. That was a slap in the face. Liz couldn't bear the thought of losing the farm that John had loved so much. The house he had built for their family. But was this really the only way? There's no way you're sending that letter. I won't allow it. Anyway, Martin Smythe is coming at 3 this afternoon, and I'll find out if things are as bad as you say. I don't believe they are. Fine. I won't send it then. Marie grabbed the letter and tore it into pieces. There. Happy. Marie huffed and puffed, walking around the room. Any moment, Liz expected to see steam coming out of her mother's ears. I am. Good. Do you mind if I invite a guest for dinner? As long as it is not Ephraim Schrock, you can invite anyone you want. Very good, Marie said, making her way back into the kitchen. Liz got up and walked over to the twins, sitting down at their table. It's bath time for you two. Are you sure you're up for that, Liz? Yeah, I can manage. I've got to get back into the normal routine. Liz walked them to the bathroom. Then she remembered she hadn't gotten their clothes. I've forgotten to get you some clean clothes. No matter. We'll go upstairs after your bath and we'll find them. Liz couldn't believe how insensitive her mother was. Liz's father had died 5 years ago, and no one had pushed her mother to move on and make a hasty marriage to the first man who'd come along. No. Her mother managed just fine without a man. Soon Liz calmed down as she watched Abe and Caleb laughing and splashing about in the water with their little wooden toys. Being around her children was calming. Her mother was right about one thing. This was where she was meant to be, with her boys, and not outdoors with the sheep. Soon she'd know how good or bad things were, and then she could make plans. After she dried the twins, she took them up to their room to find their clothes. Marie turned up her nose at the boys running up the stairs naked, but her mother wasn't happy about most things these days, so Liz ignored it. Liz helped them dress. Now it's time for a nap. No, said Caleb. I don't want one. That's okay, but you still have to lie down on your bed until I come and get you. It's rest time. They did as she said, and once she pulled the covers over them, she raced to her room to have a sleep herself. Chapter 8. And when ye stand praying, forgive if ye have aught against any, that your Father also which is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. Matthew chapter 11 verse 25. Once Liz was upstairs looking after the boys, Marie wasted no time hurrying to Andrew's place. Andrew had taken the time to have a quick bite to eat. He rarely ever stopped in the middle of the day to eat. He was surprised to hear someone at the door. Visitors to the house were few and far between. When he opened the door, he saw a worried-looking Marie. "Hello, Mrs. Glick. Is everything all right? You simply must come. Lizzy is insisting you do." "Come where? Is she okay?" "She is." He was more than happy to hear that. "She wants you to come for the evening meal today." "She does?" He rubbed his chin, hoping he hadn't been seen hurrying away earlier that day. "I don't want to keep coming there. I thought I might be intruding." "Not at all. You and she have always been close. I remember when you were younger, and you would come to the house all the time to get Lizzy and take her somewhere. I thought the two of you would be wed one day." He was shocked to hear those words come out of her mouth. It wasn't to be. "Do you have time for a cup of coffee?" he asked. "No, I have to get back." She tugged on the end of her long sleeves. "I have to tell you I wasn't the only one shocked when she came home with John one day and announced they'd be married." A shockwave ran through him. That was the very thing that had haunted him for so many long years. It was odd to hear it out of Marie's mouth. In a way, Andrew was pleased Marie hadn't known either. It appeared no one had known about John. What was the real story behind John and Liz? It must have been a whirlwind romance. If only she'd had that with him. They kept their relationship well hidden. They did, and I don't know how. Her eyebrows rose just slightly. "Do you mean that you didn't know either?" "No, I had no idea. I would have found out after you. I'm sure of it." She stepped closer to him, almost stepping on the toes of his boots. Instinctively he stepped back. Her chin lifted and her jaw jutted out. "You have a very good memory of what happened over 10 years ago." She studied his face, waiting for his answer. 8, he told her. "It's only been 8. He frowned when he realized the point she'd been making. Could she see right through him? All he could do was lower his head away from her piercing gaze. Then he reminded himself to stand up for himself and not be intimidated. He looked her straight in the eye. "She was a good friend, and that's why I remember." "Is that all?" He nodded. Then he checked himself. That wasn't entirely true, and he wanted to be a truthful man no matter the consequences or the circumstances. "Marie, if you want to know the truth, I'll trust you with it." Her lips tilted upward. "Go on. Let's sit." He motioned toward the 2 porch chairs, and she hurried to sit in the furthest one from her, and he sat in the other. "The last thing I want to do is embarrass Lizzy by bringing up the past. I don't know how she felt about me, but I wanted something more. It wasn't to be. I was right. You were in love with her." "I was. Then she married John. I'd never told her how I felt. I just assumed she knew." He shook his head. "It's my fault, I suppose, if I can speak candidly." "Speak away." It felt good to talk about it. He'd kept it bottled for so long. He chuckled when he saw her eager face. "There's nothing much to tell. I never gave her an indication that I thought of her as anything more than a friend. I've thought about it long and hard. The fault lies with me." "No, Andrew. You keep talking about faults. What happened happened, and who knows why. Maybe things would have been different if you'd done things differently, but we'll never know." "That's true." He looked out over the fields. He hadn't wanted to tell Marie about his feelings, but he felt that if he hadn't, he wouldn't have been being honest. The last thing he wanted to do was tell her to mind her business, and he considered that was the only alternative. "I appreciate your honesty." He looked over at her. It was as though she could read his mind. Was he that transparent? He inhaled deeply. "Thank you for listening to a fool." She reached over and touched his arm. "You're not a fool. Is that how she's made you feel?" "Who, Lizzy?" "No. I'm a fool for thinking a woman like her, well?" "A woman like her, what?" He shook his head. "Nothing. I've said too much already. I don't do much talking these days, and I think I've talked too much. Said things I shouldn't have said, especially to you. I might be Lizzy's mother, but I'm still a person. A person who will do what I can to see the two of you together. You'd make a fine husband for Lizzy and a good father to the twins." He smiled at the thought, and he was pleased he'd won Marie's approval. There's nothing that can be done. John's only just died. If anything happens between us, it'll take years. I'm a patient man. I'll wait and see if God wills it. If he does, then nothing will stand in our way. You're right, Andrew. She patted Andrew's arm and then pushed herself to her feet. I'll get back before Lizzy and the twins wake. I'm glad she's resting. He stood too. She stared at him. That's right, you don't know. No, how could you? Know what? Liz will be blessed with another baby. She's only just found out she's having another. Andrew's legs went weak under him. All hope he'd had of eventually becoming close to Lizzy had gone. Not only would the baby consume all her time, it'd be a constant reminder of John. Who was he kidding? Everything in her life was a constant reminder of him. He couldn't compete with John's memory. Andrew rubbed his forehead, willing himself not to shed a tear. Not in front of someone. He saw Marie staring at him, waiting for some kind of response. Forcing a smile, he said, "That's wonderful." "It certainly is. It'll mean extra work, but she's not a woman who's afraid of that." Marie chortled. "I mean, she's a woman who's not afraid of that. She'll have me and Lucy to help her with all that she needs. And the farm. Matthew is keeping an eye on it. He's put on extra workers. Or the workers are doing extra hours." She swiped her hand through the air. "Something like that. That's good to know. If ever you or Lizzy needs anything, please tell me." "I will." She shook a finger at him as she smiled. "Don't forget to come for the evening meal today." "I'll be there. And don't bring anything. You've brought us too much already. Just bring yourself and an appetite." He chuckled. "I won't eat another thing all day until I get there." "Good." She smiled once more and hurried away from him. Once she was out of sight, he collapsed onto the chair. "Lizzy is pregnant? How would she feel about that? Pregnant with John's child when John was no longer around?" Tingles ran through his body at the thought. Poor John. He'd had no choice when God had called him home. All Andrew wanted to do was see that she was happy. Living next door was a blessing. He'd always keep an eye out for Lizzy and her children. He'd do it for John as well as doing it selfishly for himself. He'd already committed to going to Lizzy's for the evening meal, but he had to wonder whether it was better to keep away after that. She'd grow tired of seeing him at her doorstep bearing all manner of items. It was only a matter of time. It was hard to know what to do. He took a deep breath and headed back to the sheep. Sheep, he understood. Women, they were an entirely different matter. Chapter 9. Let all your things be done with charity. 1 Corinthians chapter 16 verse 14. Liz's nap didn't last long because the boys crept into her bed, and she didn't have the strength to move them. She closed her eyes and dozed for close to an hour with her arms cradling the two of them as they dozed. It was hard to relax with her stomach churning about her bookkeeper's visit. When the boys woke, she headed downstairs with them. It surprised her to see her mother sitting in the easy chair. She was normally bustling about the kitchen with her work apron on. Then she saw her mother was knitting. Marie looked up over the top of her thick glasses. "There you are? All of you." Liz walked closer. A quick look at the clock told her it was an hour before the bookkeeper was to arrive. She turned her attention to her mother, who was knitting a pale yellow item. It had to be for the baby. "Are you knitting already?" "Yeah." "Where did you get the yarn? You didn't bring it with you, did you?" "No. I had Lucy bring it. I've got a whole cupboard full of yarn at home, waiting to be made into useful clothing for my grandchildren." The boys ran to their grandmother, and she held her yarn and knitting needles up above her head and let out a yell. "Careful, I'm knitting. You boys have to stay away when I'm knitting." The boys stood back, not understanding why she wouldn't want to hug them. "Mammy's worried you'll get hurt by the knitting needles," Liz told them. A loud noise outside drew Liz's attention away from the boys. It was one of the workers doing something with one of their large wagons. "Sit down beside me, Liz. Let's have a little rest before I start on fixing the evening meal. I'll have to get the boys something to eat." "No, they can wait a few minutes." It won't kill them. They won't starve. Put out some toys for them. The boys weren't complaining about being hungry, so Liz opened the chest and pulled out some building blocks. The blocks were their favorite toy, and they sat down and started playing. Sit down, Marie ordered as she continued knitting. Liz sat down. I'm sorry for meddling. You want to leave things as they are, and I thought you needed a little help, especially now with what we've found out. Liz knew she meant the baby coming. Good. You understand that I'm just trying to survive, trying to get through every day without looking too far into the future? I do. I can't even think about another man. Could you when Dad died? No, of course not, but I wasn't young like you when he died, and both you and Lucy were fully grown. Old enough to be parents yourselves. Not quite. Nearly. Liz sighed. What was that for? Oh, nothing. We do things different, you and I. That's true. I just want the world to stop for one moment so I can breathe. It seems that the world should stop and realize that he's gone, but it doesn't. Everything's the same for everyone else, and they all keep living their lives as though nothing has happened. Something has happened. She looked over at her boys, and didn't want to say too much in front of them. He's gone. You want the world to stop? Yeah, I do. The knitting needles stopped clicking. I've never heard anything like it. Her mother was a widow too, so why didn't she understand? It was hard. Hard to be here in this house when everything reminded her of John. All his clothes were still in the closet, and all his belongings where they'd always been. She hadn't touched a thing. It comforted her to leave things as they were. It felt like he'd be back. You never talk to me, Liz. Never tell me how you're feeling or what's on your mind. You've always been like that. She frowned at her mother. I've just spent the last 5 minutes talking about how I'm feeling. Marie came to the end of the row, then she loosened the yarn from the ball. I want to know something. Cast your mind back to years ago. Tell me how you became close to John, because that happened so suddenly. Not for me. I always liked him, but I never knew he liked me. It started at the Miller's barn raising. That's when we started talking. I vaguely remember that. It was Andrew's family's barn, and it had been burned down in a fire. That's right. John was so good at building things, like this house he built for us. Inside, she wanted to be angry with someone for him dying, but John being taken from her was no one's fault. It would be so much easier if she had someone to blame. I appreciate you being here, Mom. It's good of you to drop everything for me. I don't have anything to drop. It feels good being useful again. I like to be needed. You'll always be needed. A pang of guilt rushed over Liz as she thought about how her mother was aging. How John's passing would have affected her too. She would be exhausted from looking after them and preparing the meals. No wonder she was trying so hard to get her to remarry. If she remarried, that would take a burden from her mother. As much as I want you here, I don't want you to do more than you can do. Don't exhaust yourself. I'll cope. You want me to go home already? No, well, only if it's all too much for you. I don't want you getting ill. Liz, her mother suddenly blurted out. Yeah. Tonight we will make lamb chops and vegetables for our guest. Would you like to help me prepare the evening meal? She was pleased her mother was finally letting her do something. I can do a little, but I do have Martin Smythe coming at 3. Let's do what we can now. It's early, but we can make a start. Marie bundled her yarn and knitting needles together, stood, and then placed them on the top of the mantel. I'll put this here away from sticky fingers. Good idea. You boys stay and play with your blocks while Mammy and I. I'm hungry, Caleb said. Abe took his thumb out of his mouth. I'm thirsty. Liz felt like the worst mother in the world. She hadn't gotten them anything to eat or drink. Put your toys down and I'll fix you something in the kitchen. The boys hurried into the kitchen ahead of her, deliberately bumping into each other, laughing and jostling as they went. Marie walked over to the fridge and pulled out fresh broccoli, potatoes, the little bit of milk left, and the rest of the cheese. I'll make potato bake as well. I haven't had that in so long. Those potatoes of Andrew's have certainly come in handy. Marie began to hum. She loved to cook and was good at it. As Liz prepared the boys their favorite peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, she wondered who was coming for dinner. Her mother seemed to be making an effort, so it had to be someone other than Lucy and Matthew. "Who is our guest this evening, Mom?" Marie stopped humming and paused for a few seconds. "I've invited Andrew over, the lovely man from next door." Liz stopped and stared at her. Mom pretended not to notice. She was still trying to matchmake, and this made Liz mad, but she decided to brush it off as she liked Andrew and had always thought he was a good man. "That's wonderful. He's been so kind. I'm glad we can do something for him. He must be lonely over there by himself all the time. I thought you'd be upset with me." Liz cut the sandwiches into small triangles. "Oh, I'm angry all right, but I'll forgive you if we have no talk of marriage. Don't you know how hurtful this is to me and to John?" She moved closer and whispered so the boys wouldn't hear. "It's as though he didn't matter if he's so easily replaceable. No one can ever replace him. It's unthinkable. I do appreciate you coming here to help, but what you've got your mind on is not helping me. Please stop. You must, for my sake and the sake of the baby I'm having." Marie bit her bottom lip as though to stop herself from saying something. "Okay then," she said quietly. "I will be fine, Mom. I couldn't do it without you. I'm very grateful you're here with me. John was such a good man. God took him from us too soon, but he had his reasoning. I was just trying to help you and the boys. I wasn't trying to replace John. It wasn't about him, it was about you three, and soon it'll be four." Marie sighed. "I can see what you mean, though." "Can you?" "Yeah, I can." "Good." Liz headed to the kitchen to give the sandwiches to the boys. Soon they were sitting at their small table with sandwiches and milk in front of them. She knew she'd upset her mother because Mom was now giving her the silent treatment. And she wasn't humming as she normally did as she buzzed about the kitchen. Her mother would get over it, and Liz was pleased for the quiet. Liz's mind drifted to John and that last day. Dinner had been more than ready and it was dark outside. He always managed to get back to the house before sunset. She thought he might be helping an injured lamb, hurt by a predator, or helping a lamb to birth. When he wasn't in their enormous shed that housed the ewes, she turned the lights off, grabbed a flashlight and walked out to find him, leaving the boys in the house by themselves. There was no other choice. With flashlight in hand, she was horrified to find him lying face down near the sheep. The sheep had gathered around and one was nudging him with his nose. They seemed to know something was wrong. It was the most horrific moment of her life, trying to resuscitate him, not knowing if she was making things better or worse. And then having to leave him to run to the barn to call for help, while hearing her twins crying for her inside the house. She'd called out to them telling them to stay where they were and she'd be back, but they wouldn't have heard her above their cries. Andrew had heard her calling out and he'd come running. He was the first to get there. He'd listened to his heart, felt for a pulse. She told him she'd tried to revive him several minutes ago. It was Andrew who had told her that John was gone. He didn't even speak the words, didn't need to. The pitying look in his misted-over eyes had told her the truth of the situation. When she'd stared down at John's lifeless body knowing he wasn't coming back, it was as though she was in someone else's life. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to her, not to them. It seemed forever waiting for the paramedics. She'd barked out what had happened and gave them the address and had hung up. She didn't want to waste a moment on the phone when she could be by John's side. A sudden heart attack was what he'd had, she'd found out later, but why? He was so young. Nothing made sense. He wasn't even overweight. She didn't like to remember John that way, cold to the touch and so still. He wouldn't have wanted that. A tear rolled down her cheek. Her poor sweet John. How she was coping as well as she was, she didn't know. When she looked over at her boys communicating with each other in their own special way, she knew they were keeping her going and giving her strength. Chapter 10. He that loveth not knoweth not God. For God is love. 1 John chapter 4 verse 8. 3 o'clock rolled around far too quickly. Martin Smythe was an Englisher, a retired accountant who did bookkeeping. He'd told John it was to keep his mind active. The last time she'd seen Martin was at John's funeral. Martin arrived with a huge ledger under his arm. "Come in." Are those John's records? Yes. I took them to do some calculations. Then I heard about John. I didn't know. I thought they were still in the cupboard. I never looked. You'll need to check the books too. Matthew has been writing out checks for the workers and things as needed. Sure, I'll look at those, and then you said you need to know what the outlook is? She nodded. Yes. We'll use the kitchen table. I've got my mother upstairs looking after the twins so I can concentrate. It wasn't long before Liz got the distressing news that she'd come to expect. They were in debt, heavily in debt. John had already borrowed heavily against everything they owned to build the huge enclosure for the ewes. I don't know why John didn't tell me. He would have kept quiet because he wouldn't want to worry you. There is a chance that the bank would extend there. He stopped talking when he saw Liz crying. She sat up straight. I'm sorry. I'm just in shock. Matthew was supposed to be doing this with me, but he's been busy with his job and helping out here when he's not working. I didn't want to keep asking him to look at the books. I didn't even know you had them. Would you like me to come with you to the bank tomorrow? They have a habit of sudden foreclosures, and you don't want to be caught unawares. You mean with no notice? He nodded. In these economic times, the banks are under pressure too. They were once so free with their lending, and now they've tightened up. Almost no one can get a loan nowadays. I just don't know how it got so bad this quickly. It's not hard. All businesses go through a period where they need expansion. John saw an opportunity to expand and he took it. I'll work out how and when you can have this debt paid off. I'll work on some projections for the bank. They like to see things on paper. First thing tomorrow, I'll call the bank and make an appointment on your behalf. Would you? He nodded. I'll go with you too if you want. Yes, please? I should have talked to you sooner, but I thought you might have someone else looking after things now. I don't. Matthew would help, but he's no bookkeeper. We need you. He smiled. I'll stop by tomorrow as soon as I hear when the appointment is. I'll try for tomorrow. Better yet, as I'm thinking about it, why don't I collect you at 9 in the morning and we'll be on the bank's door at opening time. I can work on those projections tonight. That sounds good. Thank you. I want this all sorted as soon as possible so I don't have to worry. Liz walked the bookkeeper to the door, and then went upstairs to tell her mother what she'd found out. Her mother was sitting on one of the 2 beds while the boys played on the floor. All Marie did when she was told was shake her head. Say something, Mom. I hoped the rumors I heard weren't true. No good comes from borrowing. Only spend what you have. I know, Mom, but that's not always easy to do when you're running a farm. Some years are good and some are bad. The bank was there to help. Yeah, and now they're helping themselves to a good chunk of your money by way of a high interest rate. They are in it to make money. That's what they do. Liz sighed and sat on the bed beside her. I'm going to the bank with Martin first thing if you can watch the boys. Yeah, I will. There's nothing you can do though. All they want is your money. I'm just asking for a little more time. Be sure to tell them about John's death and the new baby coming along. I'll do that. I'll tell them everything. Martin said he's working out a plan to show them. A plan to show them how we can work our way out of this debt, and how long it will take us. She didn't tell her mother there was more than one debt. There was the regular debt on the farm, and then there was the extra loan for the lambing shed. Both were very much in arrears. Every check they'd written had gotten them deeper into debt. We have a guest coming for dinner. Let's give this worry to God, so we can enjoy our time of fellowship. Marie stood. I'll see how the dinner is coming along. I'll help. Come on, you two. You can play downstairs. Chapter 11. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. John chapter 15 verse 13. Andrew was delighted to have been asked for dinner. He'd take any opportunity to be close to Liz. All day he'd been thinking about her and couldn't get her out of his mind. He just wanted to take Liz in his arms and tell her that he'd look after her and the boys. That would have been wrong, but it would have felt so right. It seemed the day had whizzed by when a knock sounded on the door. The rosemary lamb sizzled in the baking tray and smelled amazing, and the table was set. Marie had made all her special vegetable side dishes, and all the while neither Marie nor Liz had uttered a word during the meal preparations. Liz hoped Andrew's visit would ease the tension between the two of them. "I'll get it," Marie said in a sing-song voice. She almost sounded back to her normal self. She walked past Liz and opened the door, and Liz was right behind her so she could hear what was said. Andrew stood on their doorstep straight and tall. He had a slight grin settled on his lips. He had a bunch of flowers in one hand, and a basket of something in the other. "Hello, Marie," he said quietly, and then looked over her shoulder and nodded at Liz. Marie took a quick look behind her and gave her daughter a disapproving stare. Then she turned to Andrew and opened the door wider. "Hello, Andrew. We're so glad you came." He stood there and held out the flowers. "These are for the both of you." "Flowers," Marie said, taking them and passing them to Liz. "Who doesn't love them? And I've got baked goods too. I got them from the markets. I can only bake bread. I probably could do all these things if someone showed me, but no one has." "Is that right? Maybe Liz could show you if you're interested." "No, I'm not. I don't care for cooking, only eating." "Come inside, please." Marie took the basket from his outstretched hand and then took him by the arm. Andrew took off his hat, and Liz quickly took it from him and hung it by the door. "The food smells amazing. It's an old family recipe. Liz has the recipe in her recipe file, don't you, Liz?" "That's right, I do. It's one of my favorites." As soon as they walked into the kitchen, Liz said to the boys, "You both know Mr. Miller, don't you?" "Say hello, boys," Marie told them. She was always one to make sure they said and did all the proper things. Please and thank you and greeting people properly. It didn't matter to her that at their age, they had a limited vocabulary and still found a great many things hard to say. As always, Caleb was the first one to speak. He said hello, and right after him, Abe spoke up in turn. "Thank you for coming, Andrew. So nice to see you this evening," Liz said, and then realized she should have said it earlier. Andrew's awkwardness was making her nervous, and then on top of that was her mother's mouth. Who knew what she might say at any moment? She had agreed not to say anything, but that was no guarantee that she wouldn't say the first thing that popped into her mind, regardless of the agreement. "Thank you, Liz. You have time to garden?" Marie asked, gazing at the flowers. He smiled. "It's not much of a garden. It is a little overgrown, but I do enjoy looking at the colors of the first flowers when they appear in the springtime. It's like God sending a message to us that winter has gone and summer is here." "How nice is that, Liz?" Marie said over-enthusiastically. "A man who appreciates flowers. Have a seat, Andrew." She pulled a chair part way out for him, and he took over, moving it the rest of the way out and then sitting down. "Thank you. It's nearly ready. I just have to carve it." Marie opened the gas oven and pulled out the pan. "I could do that for you," he said. "No, thank you. I like to do it. You sit too, Liz. Entertain our guest. I can do everything. I'll give the boys their food first and they can get started." "Thank you, Mom." Liz sat down opposite Andrew. That was when she noticed that he'd made an effort to dress nicely. His clothes were neatly pressed. She didn't want to stare at him, so she turned to look at what her mother was doing. As they sat at the table, Marie brought over the lamb and the rest of the vegetables. Liz couldn't help but wonder why the most handsome man in the community had yet to marry. She looked him up and down while mentally noting well-dressed, well-mannered, his shoulders broad and wide. His well-kept hair was parted to the side and his bright blue eyes were, catching her gaze. She quickly looked away. "How is your farm doing, Andrew?" Marie asked. "Well, it's good, but I'm always looking for new opportunities." "How is the farm here doing?" he inquired. "Not too good, we've got our hands full with the children. Liz has had no time to make cheese or milk the sheep." His mouth opened in horror. "Of course we milk the sheep and the goats, Mom. They'd be bleeding if we didn't, and they'd possibly die. Matthew has arranged for extra staff to do what John did. The only thing is that I haven't been able to make the yogurt or the cheese. That was always my thing, you see." Marie swiped a hand in the air. I just meant we have been busy. We do, but what needs to be done is getting done. The urgent things. If we don't get around to it soon, we will all starve. Marie joked and was the only one to laugh. If you ever need help with anything, Lizzy, please don't hesitate to ask. I'd be more than happy to lend a helping hand for however long you need. Let me know what I can do. Thank you, but I don't think there's anything right now. You must have your hands full with your own farm. We're going to be fine, Liz replied, not wanting to be a bother to anyone. She could feel her mother glaring at her. Andrew, please forgive my Lizzy, she doesn't know how to accept help. That's such a kind offer, and if we are ever in need, we will be sure to stop by and ask. We will indeed. Both Andrew and Lizzy watched Marie as she served the children and then carved the meat. Liz couldn't sit there and do nothing, so she helped her mother by placing the vegetable dishes in the middle of the adults' table. When Marie finally sat down, Andrew said, "You've made a mouth-watering feast." Marie chuckled. "We'll say our grace and then we can make a start." They closed their eyes and each said their silent prayer of thanks. Then they helped themselves to the food that stretched the length of the table. "So tell me, Andrew," Marie started, "any women in the community you've got your eye on?" "Mom," Liz said, embarrassed by her mother's intrusiveness. She looked over to Andrew, who seemed to be amused by the question. "There was someone in the past. Unfortunately, the timing was never right. Or maybe it was more that I wasn't a good fit. That's a possibility, who knows?" Liz looked at Marie. She could tell she was eager to know more, and she couldn't help but feel curious too. "Is it anyone we know?" Marie asked. "Mom, please, can we change the subject? Don't you think you're being nosy? Where was Lucy when she needed her? She'd listen to Lucy." "I'm sorry, Andrew, please don't let me overstep my boundaries. I just know of someone looking to remarry, that's all." Liz couldn't believe it. Now she was getting worse. Liz dropped her fork, which landed loudly on the plate, and stared at her mother, who once again decided not to notice. Feeling the tension at the table, Andrew cleared his throat. "All I will say is that you've met her before," Andrew said as he looked at Liz and gave a secret wink. This amused Liz. He had caught on to Marie's game and was playing along. "Oh, you can't leave me hanging, Andrew," Marie insisted. "Apologies for my overbearing mother. How do you like your meat?" Liz asked, deliberately changing the subject. "Delicious, thank you. You always were a good cook, Marie." "Overbearing?" Marie stared at her daughter. "Mom, you can't possibly be offended. You invite Andrew for dinner and ask him personal questions." Liz knew she was being rude, but so was her mother, and she'd reached her limit of politeness where her mother was concerned. Poor Andrew. Andrew cleared his throat once more. "Did I mention I won't be able to stay much longer? I have an early start tomorrow." "You have to leave soon?" Marie asked. "After I eat, and I know that's not polite." "I'm sorry." Liz looked down at her plateful of food. It was all nicely cooked, the cheese-topped creamy potatoes and the tender lamb with lashings of tasty thick gravy. The asparagus spears with lemon glaze, the baked baby beetroot. Thanks to her mother, she'd lost what little appetite she'd had. Marie looked at their guest. "Tell us something, Andrew. What would you like to know?" Liz held her breath. "What do you like about being a sheep farmer?" A smile lit up his face. "There are so many ways to farm sheep. For meat, for milk, for the fleece. And with every one of those possibilities, there are thousands of different ways to do it. What's good for one farmer might not suit another. It's a ton of work, but it's so rewarding. I've found that there is a group of local spinners that'll pay a higher price for the fleeces. Much higher than the wholesalers I used to sell to." He turned to Liz. "I can put you in touch with them. I was talking to some of them at an event I went to a couple of years back." "Thanks. I'd love that. I completely forgot about them. There are many things I've learned over the past year or so. I often had conversations with John about different ideas. We'd often see each other when one or the other was out mending fences. And that's a typical thing us farmers end up doing." "Yeah, John was always fixing the fences." Liz looked over at the twins and saw they'd finished. "Do you boys want dessert now?" "Yeah, Mom." "Yeah, please, Mom," Caleb said. Please, echoed Abe. They're very polite, Andrew said. They better be. Marie gave a firm nod. I can't tolerate bad manners. Excuse me. I'll get them something and then they can go to bed. Liz had to bite her tongue at her mother's words. Can't tolerate bad manners? What about her own bad manners, putting their guest on the spot like that with those personal questions? She served the twins jello and fruit, and then sat down while Andrew and her mother finished eating the main meal. Liz pushed the food around on her plate, taking a tiny bite now and again while hoping no one would notice she wasn't eating much. By the time Marie got up to serve the adults their dessert, the twins were finished with theirs and Liz excused herself. Say good night to Mr. Miller. Good night, Mr. Miller, they chorused. Marie hugged them both and then Liz took them upstairs. Once they were in their bedroom, she knew she had to get back in case her mother said something dreadful. Both of you get into bed with your clothes on. As soon as Mr. Miller has gone, I'll come back and help you into your pajamas, okay? By the time she'd finished speaking, Abe was already on the bed cuddling Blanky with his thumb in his mouth. Pajamas now, Caleb said. No. I said get into bed now, Liz whispered. I won't be long. She pulled back the covers and Caleb got into bed. She gave them both a wave before she hurried back to the kitchen. She arrived to hear him say, "Thank you both for a wonderful dinner." Of course, Marie replied. Aren't you going to stay for dessert, Andrew? She knew he loved dessert or anything sweet. No. I must get up early as I said before. Okay. Thanks so much for coming. Thank you for inviting me. I'll walk you out, Liz said, glancing at her mother. Good night, Andrew, Marie called out. Liz walked in front of him, took his hat off the peg and turned around and handed it to him. I'm so sorry about the things she was saying. Don't give it another thought. It was funny. It wasn't. Not really. She's trying to marry me off. I told her to stop it. So I'm not the first man she's tried to sell you to? Liz smiled and shook her head. No. I've asked her to stop and she said she would. You heard how well she's keeping her word. Clearly she doesn't care what I think. He placed his hat on his head and Liz opened the door. She's trying to do what's best for you. Yeah, what she thinks is best for me. He stepped onto the porch. Night, Lizzy. Only he and her mother called her Lizzy. It didn't sound annoying when he called her that. Good night. He picked up a flashlight he'd left on the porch, flicked it on and walked away. She quietly closed her door. They would have had a much better night if her mother hadn't been there. Instead of a relaxing night like she needed, it had been a stressful one. She walked back to the kitchen. You scared him away. Me? Yeah, you. He said he needed an early night, something about having an early start. As Marie continued to clear the table, she said, I've always liked Andrew. People said he was odd, but I kind of see what they mean now. He's a little different. Marie's lips turned down and she lifted her chin. Liz knew that Andrew was firmly off her mother's list of suitors. If only she could find some way to send her mother home, but she needed her. She was getting so tired. You go to the living room, Mom. I'll clean up here. No, it's too much work for you. You go and put your feet up in the living room. I'll make you a hot cup of tea soon. Are you sure? Yeah. Now off you go. Liz sat down, angered that her mom hadn't listened to her and was still trying to matchmake. What was the point? Nothing she could say would make her mom stop, and she didn't have the energy to argue. She would prove to her mom that she could do it alone, even if she wasn't sure she could. The twins. They'd been waiting for her to come back. She hurried up the stairs, and when she got to their doorway she saw both of them fast asleep. They were still in their day clothes. Her previously well-run house was falling apart. This is not so bad, she told herself. They're just pajamas. She headed downstairs, certain that she'd feel a whole lot better tomorrow after her visit to the bank. Chapter 12. Fear thou not, for I am with thee, be not dismayed. For I am thy God, I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee, yea. I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. Isaiah chapter 41 verse 10. The next morning after breakfast, Liz was waiting anxiously for the bookkeeper to arrive. When she saw his car pulling up the driveway, she said to the boys, "Be good for Mammy. I'll be back around lunchtime." "Can I come too?" Caleb asked. "No, you can't. I'm going to the bank and children can't go there." "Can I come?" Abe asked, just to copy his twin. From the couch, Marie told them sharply, "When your mother says no, that's the end of it." The boys opened their mouths and stared at her. They weren't used to hearing such shrill tones. Liz leaned down and kissed them both on the tops of their heads. "I'll see you later." "I'll be praying," Marie said. "Thank you, Mom." "So will I." She dashed out the door to Martin's waiting car. It gave her some kind of peace of mind when she saw how calm he looked. He was dressed the part too, in a dark suit, and what was left of his hair was slicked back neatly. "Good morning." "Morning to you. Thanks for doing this, Martin. I really appreciate it." He drove the car forward in readiness to turn it around. "Of course. I always do this kind of thing for my clients if needed." "Did you get a chance to do that work?" "I did. It's all in my briefcase in the back." She breathed easier. They were prepared. When his car was facing back down towards the driveway, he proceeded out to the road. "Nervous?" he asked as he glanced over at her. "A little. I'm worried." "No need to be worried. We'll present them with the facts and they'll give us an answer." "That's exactly what I'm worried about. The answer might not be the one we want to hear. All we can do is try our best and leave it in their hands." She nodded. "And in God's hands." "That's right." Martin managed to get a parking spot directly outside the bank, and they were the first to walk in when the doors opened. The manager was available to see them right away. They were ushered into an office with frosted glass walls and invited to sit in red plush seats. A moment later, Mr. Waltham, the loan manager, walked in. He shook both their hands and smiled a well-practiced impersonal smile. "Thank you for seeing us on short notice," Martin said. He gave a nod, adjusted his round glasses and sat behind a glass-topped desk. Liz couldn't help but notice how neatly everything was arranged. "Give me a moment to familiarize myself with your account, Mrs. Lehman, Mr. Smythe," he told them. They sat in nervous silence for a few minutes. Finally he spoke and turned away from the computer screen. "And you're here today to bring these loans up to date?" He pushed his glasses further up his nose. This wasn't a good start. Liz looked over at Martin. "We're here to present a plan for how we can do that." Martin put his folder on the table and opened it, and then he began to explain incomings and outgoings. He finished with what payments they would be able to make weekly over the next few years to catch up. "It all looks fine and good, Mr. Smythe, but I'm not sure if it's practical. You have used the best-case scenario with everything and haven't." "I know, but we are positive that this can be done," Martin spoke with confidence. Mr. Waltham shook his head, closed Martin's folder abruptly and handed it to him. "All I can see is what's been happening over the past weeks. Nothing's been deposited, and before that you were in trouble." Martin took the folder, and then pushed it back across the table to him. "Could you take another look?" "I'll tell you what. How about I look over these figures, and I'll let you know what we decide." "And how long will that take?" asked Liz. "You'll have an answer in a day or two." Liz knew he'd already made up his mind. She had to say something to sway him. "Our farm is something my husband wanted to work as a family. You see, I have twin boys." "Are they working on the farm?" She frowned. How old did he think she was, to be able to have two boys old enough to work on the farm? "Not yet, but they will." "How old are they?" "Only 3, soon to be 4. If I might take a minute to explain. My husband always wanted us to run this as a family. I will work on it now. I haven't been able to work for a few weeks, but I will again. Starting from tomorrow. It's been tough with the funeral to arrange and adjusting to life without John. I've also had morning sickness. I'm pregnant." She smiled shyly, expecting to be congratulated. The more she talked, the deeper his frown lines became, with no trace of a smile. He picked up the folder, opened it and took another look. "This whole scenario includes you working a full day, 6 days a week." He closed the book. "Now, I see that won't be happening." "No, but I have my sister. She can fill in for me, you see. And what's her name? Lucy Glick. Liz bit her lip, hoping God would forgive her for telling a lie. Her sister had never done a day's work on the farm, and never intended to, going by their last conversation. Like I said, I'll take a look. Thanks for coming in. He nodded at them, and rose to his feet, indicating their meeting was done. Liz stood and looked him directly in the eyes. Mr. Waltham, can we do anything to make the situation better? I know it's not entirely your decision, and you have to talk things over with other people, but what can we do to make the bank look more favorably on us? He rubbed his chin. Make a deposit of $150,000, Mrs. Lehman, and that will do it. It was useless, but she wasn't upset about trying. At least now she knew she'd done everything she possibly could. Just a question, if I might. I can see you kept letting those checks clear even though the account was overdrawn. Why was that? Asked Martin. Mr. Waltham's eyebrows nearly met in the middle. I can't answer that. And is it your bank's policy to loan people money when you should have seen they couldn't pay it back? Especially with your high interest rates. Liz looked at Martin, worried he was upsetting the very man who could help them. Mr. Lehman was over 21. He knew what he was getting himself in for. He met our lending criteria at the time. Seeing you're his accountant, maybe you should have advised him better. Bookkeeper, Martin corrected him. We'll give you an answer to your proposal. Thanks for coming in. Mr. Waltham stood and ushered them to the door of his office. Chapter 13. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. And lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Proverbs chapter 3 verse 5-6. When they stepped out of the bank, Liz looked at Martin. That didn't go well, did it? We'll soon find out. What do you think, though? He shook his head and pressed his lips together. I don't think us going there helped your situation at all. It didn't hurt, though, either. Liz sighed. We need a miracle. We do. As they walked over to the car, he said, we might have bought ourselves a little time. They're obliged to look over and consider all the things I've pointed out. Then there are compassionate grounds, as we've pointed out. Unfortunately, banks aren't known for their compassion. It's good we bought some time. That's good. A little time is good. Thanks for coming with me. Of course. Anything for your family. John was good to me. He recommended me to many of his friends. John had worked so hard on the farm that she had to save it. Where would she and the boys live if it had to be sold? All the way home in the car and between the small talk Martin was making, Liz thought about what life would be like for her and the twins, living with her mother and Lucy in her mother's tiny home. They'd be all cramped up. The house was right next to a road where cars whizzed by, and that wasn't good for the boys if they went wandering. There were so many things to worry about, so many things to consider. When Martin drove up the driveway, Liz turned to him. Why don't you come in and have something to eat with us? No, thanks all the same. I do have some things I need to catch up with. Thanks once again. I was happy to do it. He smiled. And there's no need to keep thanking me. I'll be in touch. She got out of the car and walked into the house while Martin made a U-turn and headed back down the driveway. Matthew was in one of the paddocks. She noticed him waving her over. It seemed he was going to be the first to hear the bad news. As she walked toward him with her legs feeling heavy, she wished she had better news. Could God turn things around? It was hard being in the hands of the bank. What happened? Matthew asked, peering into her face. I don't think we have much chance. It's useless. We're never going to come up with a huge amount of money like they want. Did they say that? Yeah, more or less. I don't think anything except $150,000 would make them happy. Is that what they said? She nodded. We tried everything except getting down on our knees and begging, and even that wouldn't have helped. Everything just seems so cold. We're just numbers to them. Little marks on their computer screen. Mr. Waltham already has his finger on the delete button. He took his hat off and shook out his dark hair. Don't lose faith. God works in wondrous ways. I won't stop hoping and praying for a miracle. This place is, or rather was, everything to John, and I need to keep it for the boys. What a wonderful thing they can have when they grow up knowing that their father started this from nothing. She looked around at the beautiful green pastures. There was nothing here when we arrived, just a house. There wasn't even a barn. Hey! He laughed. It wasn't just John. I helped him. She managed to smile. You know what I mean. He arranged for it to be built. I do. He put his hands on his hips and looked around. He sure loved it here, and he loved the sheep. I don't know what he saw in the farming life, though. I know it's not for you, and that's good because it's not the life for Lucy either. He made scoffing sounds. At least Lucy and I can agree on something. He smiled, but Liz took note of the serious undertones to his words. She wasn't surprised that he didn't get along with Lucy sometimes. She could be difficult. She was spoiled and always wanted her own way. When do they need the money by? Did they say? Last week, I guess. They didn't say because they knew I didn't have it. Martin says they have a habit of just foreclosing suddenly, without warning. I think that means they just come and tell us they're taking over the place, and for us to get out. I'm sorry, Liz. I get the idea that you didn't know things were bad. You're saying that you knew. Chapter 14. God is not a man that he should lie. Neither the Son of Man that he should repent. Hath he said, and shall he not do it? Or hath he spoken, and shall he not make it good? Numbers chapter 23 verse 19. Matthew sighed. I had an idea. He didn't have the money for that fancy facility. He needed it. It's just one of those things. I guess so. Are you staying for dinner tonight? Yeah. Marie already invited me, and Lucy's eating here too. She's here already? She is. She's playing with the boys. Thank you for helping here today. Lucy and I will do all we can. It's the least I can do for John and for you. She smiled at him and then turned and headed to the house. When she got inside, the boys were nowhere to be seen. It was only Lucy and her mother on the couch, and Lucy was sobbing. Liz rushed over. Where are they? The boys are asleep, Marie said. Good. She looked at Lucy. What's wrong? Lucy just shook her head. Liz sat on the other side of her and stroked her arm. What are you upset about? I'm upset because of Matthew. Liz frowned. What do you mean? I was just talking to him. He's here and staying for the evening meal. You sit here and talk to her, Liz. I'll make us all a pot of hot tea. When their mother left, Liz repeated, What's the matter? It's just the same old thing. I can't see where it will ever end. I'm at the brink of going to the bishop and telling him the problem. What is the problem exactly? Liz was a little frustrated. She'd just been to the bank to save the farm, and Lucy was upset, most likely because her boyfriend didn't show her enough attention. It was typical of her selfish younger sister. All she could think about was herself. He won't marry me yet, not until he saves money for a house. I'm sure the bishop wouldn't think that was a good idea. That's something you should talk over with Matthew. You can't go to the bishop about something like that. It'd be silly. Besides, Matthew's always told you that's his plan. Lucy stared at her and wiped her tears away with the back of her hand. It's not silly. It's all right for you. You have a house, a family, and everything. I've got nothing, and I'm just waiting on him. You've got 2 babies, and soon it'll be 3. I'm just sitting here waiting for my turn to come. Will it ever arrive? Liz had totally lost interest. I've got everything? I just buried my husband, and I'm about to lose my home and farm. Where was Mom with that hot tea? Will what arrive? My turn. Do you want me to talk to him about it? Liz offered, hoping Lucy would say no. No, that would be dreadful. Well, you say something then if it's upsetting you. In a relationship, you need to communicate your problems if you're upset. I have said something, but he won't listen. Well, I don't really know the answer. Maybe there isn't an answer at all. Maybe the answer is, I should tell him I'm no longer interested in getting married. Liz knew Lucy would calm down, but at this moment her problems must have seemed real to her. She tried her best to be understanding and to help the situation. Matthew was a good man, and who else would put up with her sometimes selfish and spoiled sister? But you love him, don't you? I do, but he's not listening to me. If he really loved me, wouldn't he listen to me? Well, maybe you need to have that conversation with him. Lucy looked at her with her grumpy face. You're not listening to me, Liz. I've already had that conversation with him. He doesn't care. He just wants everything his way. Liz couldn't take any more of Lucy's whining. Well, maybe he feels it's you who wants everything your way, Lucy. Have you thought of that? She stared at Liz and burst into tears and ran into the kitchen with their mother. Liz couldn't hear what was said, but she heard hysterical talking coming from the kitchen. A couple of minutes later, her mother marched out and put her hands on her hips. Why would you upset Lucy? I think the appropriate thing to ask me, Mom, is this. So, Liz, how did it go at the bank today? Her mother's stance softened and she took her hands off her hips. I'm sorry. How did it go? She moved to sit beside her. Not good. I need to find thousands from somewhere. Otherwise, it won't be good. I'll talk to the bishop to see if we can gather around and get people. No, Mom, it's $150,000 the bank wants. It's way too much. I'm not going to borrow money from people when I can't pay it back, and it's too much to ask people to donate. Join me in praying for a miracle? I will do that. And I wasn't being mean to Lucy. I just told her to talk things over with Matthew. I've offered to talk to Matthew, but she won't let me. I don't think it's a good idea to go to the bishop about Matthew. He's always told her his plan to wait, and she must have agreed at the start. The poor girl has already waited so long. But there's nothing you or I can do about that, Mom. It has to come from Matthew. I know. It just upsets me to see one of my children upset, and now both of you are upset. Mom wrung her hands in her lap. I'll go finish making that hot tea. That's a good idea. I'm sure that will make us all feel a lot better. When her mother left the room, Liz got up from the couch and tiptoed upstairs to look at her sleeping boys. They were fast asleep. The day was cool, so she pulled their light covers over them and crept back downstairs. By that time, her sister was sitting in the living room, so it was difficult to avoid her. Mom was sitting next to her pouring the tea. There were 3 cups, Liz noticed. When she approached them, Lucy looked up at her. I'm sorry, Liz. I don't mean to be selfish. Mom told me it didn't go so well at the bank. Liz shook her head. It didn't. Sit with us, Lizzy, her mother said. Okay. She slumped into the chair opposite them. Lucy continued, as she cradled the teacup in her hands. I have to tell you that I'm worried. I would marry him without a care where we lived or if we had money or not. Why doesn't he think the same of me? Liz sighed. So much for any more sisterly sympathy. Everything was still about Lucy. Why couldn't they talk about how to save the farm? I don't know. I know you don't know. I was just saying that. You didn't have to answer. Oh, sorry. Liz stood and reached over to take the teacup from her mother's outstretched hands. Thank you. Then she sat down again. He's waiting until we get a sizable deposit for a house. But he should be able to pay off the whole house with as long as I've waited. How long have you and he been? We are going into our 10th month now, I think. I mean, it's going to be embarrassing. Do you think something is wrong? Should I leave him and find somebody else? Oh, it's no use. There is no one else. Because I've bypassed everyone to wait for him. Now I have committed to marry him, so surely he won't go back on it, will he? No. Mom sipped her tea. What do you think, Mom? Liz asked. I think Matthew's very much in love with Lucy. I do as well. Everything just seems so difficult. Liz couldn't help being upset by Lucy's remark. Do you really think your life is difficult? Lucy looked across at her. Oh, I know you're having a hard time of it at the moment, but soon you'll have 3 babies and I'll still have none. It won't be long. I'm sure it won't be. Marie patted Lucy's hand. I was an older mother than most too. I don't want to be an old mother. Now I will be. I wanted to grow up with my children. It's only a matter of time. It will happen. Yeah, but it's not just that, Liz. He has grown distant. We used to go for walks every second day. Now I see him maybe once a week, if that. Liz couldn't help but feel guilty. Didn't Lucy know where he was? That he had been over at her house almost every day since John had gone. Not wanting to cause more drama, she decided it was best to keep that fact quiet. Lucy, I don't think you have anything to worry about with Matthew. He is a good, honest man. I think you need to address these issues with him and ask him yourself. No, Liz, we talk about it all the time. It'll be the same thing. Be patient, Lucy. As soon as I have enough saved for a house, we'll get married, Lucy, she said, mimicking him sarcastically. This made Liz laugh. You do know you're the most impatient person I've ever met, don't you? Please go easy on him. I'm telling you as your big sister, that man loves you and he's trying to do things the right way as he sees it. Give him time. Lucy was sick of hearing the same thing and rolled her eyes in acceptance. Okay, Liz, I'll take your advice for once, she said quietly. This made them all laugh. Lucy continued, we've been friends for a long time. Ever since you and John married, but then we got even closer about a year ago. Not exactly a year ago, but close enough. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be talking to you like this when you're so sad. Am I making you feel worse, Liz? Liz sighed and felt awful for being angry with Lucy. It wasn't Lucy's fault that the farm might be whisked away at any moment. No. You're taking my mind off my worries, so that's good. Tell us exactly what happened at the bank, Lizzy, Marie said. It's not looking good, and I have to start working again rather than us paying wages out. Marie's eyebrows rose. But you've only got a few more months and then. Liz interrupted her mother. What's the use? I'll have to keep working right up until the baby is born, and then start right back again after. Everything will work out, just you wait and see. Is there anything I can do? If I had the money I'd give it to you, but I don't have a cent. I know you would, Mom. Losing this farm would be the most devastating thing to ever happen to me. John wanted this dream so bad. The dream of a sheep farm that his children would one day run. It's not gone yet, Lucy said. I don't know what else I can do. Even if we let one of the workers go and I work in his place, that would help over time, but we don't have time. The bank wants their money. The sheep will be sheared soon, but the money from the wholesalers is also not enough to keep us out of debt. I feel there's nothing more I can do, Liz said to Lucy. Liz, there is always a way. My faith has never been so strong before. I'm praying for you and the boys every day. You can always come stay with me at Mom's, you know that. The boys have a room, and you can bunk with me. I won't be there much longer anyway. That's right, Mom agreed. I could also get a job to help out, Lucy said. Liz smiled. Her sister wasn't so selfish after all. She'd never heard her be so generous. You could help me here on the farm. I meant a paid job. I'm already busy, so I don't have a lot of free time. Marie nodded. Yeah, it must be hard on you with me gone. You have to keep the house clean all by yourself. And there are the garden and the chickens, Lucy added. It's so rough, but I'm managing the best I can. I can see that, Liz said. Is that a new dress you're wearing? Yeah. Do you like it? Lucy stood up and spun in a circle. It's very nice. I could make you one too. Next time I'm in town I can get some more fabric. I can get this very shade if you like it. It's nice, but I prefer something darker. I'll make it in a dark green. Liz touched her stomach. It wouldn't be any use to me just now. But I'd love it if you make me one after the baby's born. Then that's exactly what I shall do. Also, would you like a larger dress that you can wear when you get bigger? No thank you. I have plenty of those in the closet. They heard the rattling of the doorknob. Everyone shush. That'll be Matthew. Not a word about what I've said. Matthew walked in and closed the door behind him. He stood there staring at the three of them. Liz could see he was wondering why all conversation had stopped. Cup of hot tea? Mom asked him. No thank you, Marie. I'll just get myself a glass of water. Lucy jumped to her feet. I'll get it for you. Then one of the twins called out, and Liz wasted no time moving off the chair. Being with her boys was what she needed right now. Chapter 15. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which according to his abundant mercy hath begotten us again unto a lively hope by the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 3. It had been a while since Liz had seen Andrew. He hadn't told her what he'd learned at that meeting, and now she was in the right frame of mind to hear it. If there was anything to increase the profits, then she'd gladly do it. Anything to keep the bank away from their door. The last few days she'd made the time to make cheese and yogurt. Now she was on her daily early morning drive to the markets to sell her goods. When she had finished doing that, she'd stop by Andrew's place and ask him some questions. As she drove, she counted her blessings. Matthew had been there every day helping out, putting in at least 3 hours a day. Her mother had stayed on and helped with everything she could to free her for doing the farm work she could manage. Martin, the bookkeeper, was only a phone call away, and her sister often took the boys overnight. She was determined to look on the bright side of things. It was an extra warm morning as she drove her horse and buggy into town. The cool breeze felt nice on her face as she listened to the clip-clopping of the horses' hooves along the dirt-packed road. She spotted another buggy not too far ahead coming toward her. As it came closer, she saw it was Andrew's buggy. As they made eye contact, he smiled and waved. Andrew pulled the reins of his horse and came to a halt. She stopped her horse, suddenly feeling as though she didn't want to talk with him at all. Not to him and not to anyone. Her heart pounded, and all she wanted to do was go back to bed and pull the covers over her head. Andrew took his hat off and smiled at Liz. "Where are you off to this morning?" "To the market to sell some goods. I don't have enough for them to come and collect it." Liz was eager to keep moving, so she kept her reply brief. "I missed you at the meeting on Sunday." Liz thought back to Sunday. That horrible Sunday morning, she had been unable to even get out of bed. Her morning sickness had returned with a vengeance, and she was sick in bed most of the day. "Yeah, I was quite unwell that morning. I'm feeling much better now, though." "Have you been ill?" Andrew asked. "I've been okay. I'm sorry, Andrew, but I must keep moving. I've got to get back to help out. We've only got one full and one part-time worker now." Not wanting to be a bother, he quickly acknowledged and put his hat back on. "Let me know if you need anything, Liz." "Thank you, Andrew." Liz smiled as she jiggled the reins, signaling her horse to move on. As she drove off, she couldn't help thinking that Andrew was another blessing in her life. She hoped she hadn't been too abrupt with him. She turned around and caught Andrew also staring back at her. When their eyes met, he quickly turned back around. Liz had just sold all of her goods at the markets. She had collected the mail from their post office box in town and was untying her buggy to leave for home when she heard a man call out her name. She turned around and was stunned to see Ephraim Schrock. She opened her mouth but no words came out. "How are you, Liz? It's so good to see you." "Ephraim. I haven't seen you in over 10 years. What are you doing here?" Ephraim took off his straw hat to reveal his thick ginger brown hair. "Your mom reached out to me, so I decided to come for a visit." Liz was shocked. Her mom had agreed not to contact him. Liz was enraged, but Ephraim was a nice man and this was not his fault. She looked him up and down, noticing he still wore pants with holes at the knees, a dirty shirt, and his straw hat that had seen better days. Not wanting to be rude, she decided to play along. "That's very kind of you, Ephraim. I'm not sure what my mom said in her letter, but my husband John. He died." "Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear it. Must be awful for you and those young twins of yours." "Thank you." Liz gave him a nod. "I've got some business to attend to. I'll be staying at my uncle's farm for a few months. I'd love it if you'd come for a visit one time." He gave her a wink, didn't wait for an answer, and walked away. Liz was not in any way attracted to Ephraim now, never had been even a little. She'd always seen him as the skinny kid who had a crush on her. He wasn't skinny anymore. After Liz got home, unhitched the buggy and tended to the horse, she was exhausted. No one was there to help her, and she couldn't pull one of the workers off the farm just to tend to the horse. Her life was physically harder with John gone, but she couldn't complain. She opened the front door to see Marie and Matthew in the living room. While Matthew played with the twins, Marie was once again knitting baby clothes. All she had been knitting since she found out Liz was pregnant was baby clothes. Liz closed the door heavily and they both looked over at her. Hadn't Matthew heard her arrive? He should have come out to help her. John would have done that for any woman. The boys ran over and hugged her, and then ran back to the large block wall they were building. She walked closer to her mother. "Any guess who I ran into at the shops today, Mom?" "Who, my dear?" she said, making sure to avoid eye contact. "Ephraim Schrock. Who apparently you wrote to in spite of your agreement with me, and asked him to come because I'm on the quest for a new husband." Liz slipped the bag of mail off her shoulder and held it against herself. Marie looked embarrassed. Liz knew she was being awfully confrontational with Matthew sitting close by, but she didn't care. She'd had enough. Enough of her mother's pushy talk of her marrying again, enough of working through the tiredness, enough of her sister's selfishness, and now Matthew was being thoughtless. Liz stamped her foot. "I will tell you this for the last time. I will not remarry." She walked into the kitchen and tossed the bag onto the kitchen table, pleased that her boys hadn't looked up when she'd done that just now. Then Liz heard her mother say to Matthew, "Sorry, Matthew. Baby hormones." For the sake of not screaming in front of her boys, she clutched the kitchen sink and looked out the window trying to calm herself. Then she heard Matthew's heavy footsteps walk into the room. "You okay?" he asked softly. She sighed, still clutching the sink. "Not really. Thanks for being here and helping out. I love helping with the children. It's just playing. Besides the boys, they're the only family I've got left around these parts." Liz felt sorry for Matthew. It was only last year when both his and John's parents had died, and now his only brother John was gone too. "Don't let us hold you back from your life. You worry about us too much. You have a life with Lucy. Don't neglect that." "I know, but John would want me to make sure you and the children were okay. I've seen the way you've been working lately. Non-stop and in a rush all the time." Liz knew he was right. The only way she was coping right now was by keeping busy. She had hardly spent any time with the twins, and was so grateful that the rest of her family had been here for them when she couldn't be. "I will slow down, if you promise to stop worrying about us so much and go and have fun with Lucy," Liz replied, noticing the mention of her name made Matthew suddenly uncomfortable. "Speaking of Lucy, she and I have differing points of view about many things. Were cracks forming in their relationship? Perhaps him delaying their marriage had nothing to do with him saving for a deposit. Anything you want to talk about?" "I'm not ready to marry yet. Until we have enough saved to buy a place, and to be truthful, I don't know where I want to live. Maybe I want to move away somewhere. Try living in a different town." He chuckled. "You know Lucy, she's so eager to live life, also very impatient. I've always told her I won't marry until I have a certain sum saved, and I'm nearly there." "That's wonderful." Your sister doesn't agree." Liz laughed and felt calmed enough to unclench her hands from the sink. "I know better than anyone else that she always wants things her own way, but she'll be okay. Is she not talking to you?" His eyebrows rose. "How did you know?" "I truly do know her better than anyone. She'll come around. She always complains, but then she sees sense in the end. I couldn't cope if I lost her." He looked up at her. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Liz. Me and my big mouth. You've just lost John. We all have, but you've lost your husband. It's okay. I can't hope everyone could be as miserable as I am. I'll see what I can do to help." "Would you?" "Yes." Liz walked over and sat at the kitchen table. She pulled the mail she had collected out of her bag and put it on the table. Something official with a final notice stamp on the envelope caught her eye, and she quickly opened it. It was a final notice to pay the bank. She dropped it onto the table. Everything was too much. Matthew rushed to her side. "What is it?" She pointed to the demand notice. "The bank. They didn't listen to us. They want that loan paid. They're not going to bend, not 1 inch. I'll go with you to the bank tomorrow, Liz. We'll sort this thing out. It could be a mistake." "Thank you, Matthew." I appreciate that, but it's no mistake. We can't pay all that. Not in one lump sum. She sighed and put her hand on her tummy. We have our health and we have each other. This is just a piece of land. It doesn't matter. As long as we're all together. That was not how she felt, but she could cope if somehow she made herself believe it. She got up. Can you ask Mom or Lucy to watch the twins? I need to go for a walk. Sure. Take all the time you need. We'll look after everything here. She couldn't look at his concerned face because she'd burst into tears. There was no point in crying anymore. There had been enough tears. Liz walked outside and was met with the familiar smell of sheep. She inhaled deeply. It wasn't a bad smell. It just took a bit of getting used to. Now she'd miss it and the goats. She wouldn't be able to take them with her. Her favorite place was the huge shed that John had recently built for the soon-to-give-birth ewes and their lambs. Now she knew it was that extravagance that had been their undoing. Now the farm would probably be sold off at auction for a bargain price. She hoped it went to nice people who loved it as much as they did. She walked on and came to the duck pond. The ducks were nowhere to be seen. Why had John kept their dead a secret from her? At first she'd been angry with him. How could he leave them in this bad financial situation? With a little help from other people and her mother, she was able to see the bigger picture. John hadn't wanted to stress her, and that was obviously why he'd been working so much harder before his death. Could it have been what caused his heart attack? The stress and pressure and fear of losing everything he had worked so hard to build? What she needed to do was talk to Andrew and see if there was anything he could think of. He was a smart man, and before she gave up, she'd tell him how bad things were and see if he could think of anything that would save the farm. She left the pond and walked into the large enclosure. After she walked around and looked at the ewes, she was satisfied that all was well. They all looked happy in their pens, safe from coyotes and wild dogs. They'd all been fed and watered, and their bedding was freshly laid. If she went to talk to Andrew now, she could be back before dinner. She stepped out of the shed and froze. Standing in front of her was Ephraim Schrock. Her day just dropped to a new low. Liz? Ephraim exclaimed enthusiastically. Hello, Ephraim, what brings you here today? Liz asked, trying her best not to sound annoyed. Ah, your mother invited me for the evening meal. Didn't she tell you? No. She didn't, we don't even have anything prepared. I'm sorry. I didn't see anything cooking. Please come inside. He chuckled. I saw you walking into this building. What is it? Just where we keep the lambs and their mothers. She showed him into the house and left him to talk with Matthew, who was in the living room. Then she went to find out what was going on. When she walked into the kitchen, she saw her boys sitting at their little table eating cut apples and grapes. She leaned over and kissed the tops of their heads. There you are, Marie said. Something else you forgot to tell me, Mom. Ephraim Schrock is in the living room. Ah, very good. Hurry and finish your food, boys. We have a guest. You must go upstairs to your room and play quietly until it's time to come down and eat your dinner. Liz said, I know what you're trying to do and it's not going to work. Marie turned around and snapped. I'm not trying to do anything except make sure my grandchildren and my daughter are safe and provided for. If you don't want my help anymore, I'd be happy enough to go back home. Then she grabbed each boy by the hand and marched them out of the room before they'd even finished their fruit. Not having the energy to fight, and knowing she couldn't manage without her mother, Liz knew she'd have to suffer through an intolerable dinner. Visiting Andrew would have to wait. Chapter 16. So shall the knowledge of wisdom be unto thy soul. When thou hast found it, then there shall be a reward, and thy expectation shall not be cut off. Proverbs chapter 24 verse 14. That night there were 5 at the dinner table. Matthew and Lucy were there as well. After they'd said their thanks for the food and filled their plates from the serving dishes, Marie stared at Liz and then she said, Isn't it good to see Ephraim again, Liz? Lucy stopped eating and so did Matthew. All eyes were on her. Yeah, of course. What has it been, 8 or 10 years at least? Liz said politely. Apart from when I saw you in town earlier today. What have you been doing with yourself, Ephraim? Marie asked eagerly. I've built a home out of a barn for myself. It's more like a loft. The bedroom part is the loft. I renovated it myself. It's very cozy and neat, big enough for one, but I'm still on the search for that special person. Ephraim shot Liz a smile. Oh, how wonderful! Marie gasped. Isn't that wonderful, Liz? A loft. That sounds so nice. Liz stared at her mother. Surely she couldn't have been impressed that he lived in a barn. Did she want her to marry him and take the twins to live in a barn? Sounds totally wonderful, Ephraim, Lucy said energetically, knowing neither Ephraim nor their mom would pick up on her sarcasm. Liz chuckled to herself once again, grateful for her sister's support. My uncle is hosting an auction on Monday after the Sunday meeting next month. Will I be seeing you all there? Ephraim looked around at each one of them. It's for charity. For the local volunteer firefighters. Definitely, Marie said. Tom let us all know at last week's meeting. We will definitely be there, won't we, everyone? She asked. Sounds like fun, Liz replied. But I might have to work. I work 6 days a week here on the farm. I'm sure you could have just one day off, he asked. No. I couldn't. Not even one. You'll enjoy it. Go on. Ask your boss for the day off. She is the boss, Matthew told him. Ephraim's face lit up. Wonderful. I'll look forward to seeing you there, Liz. Liz willed her lips to smile, but all she could manage was for one side of her mouth to lift up slightly into half a grin. The rest of the dinner didn't get any better. When the dessert was over, Liz half stood and was about to say she was putting the twins to bed when Ephraim spoke. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but if you would excuse me, I was hoping to get a chance to speak with Liz privately? The question was directed at Marie. Definitely, Marie said, a little too eagerly. Liz couldn't face it. I was just about to put the twins to bed. Nonsense, Mom said. Lucy can do that, and you can say goodnight to them later. Sure, Lucy was prompted to say, only after a glare from her mother. Thank you. Liz, if you'd accompany me for a walk in the garden? Ephraim asked. Liz felt her stomach sink. Why did he want to speak with her? This was something she didn't have time for. She would not remarry, and it angered her all the more that she was in this situation because of her overbearing mother. Of course, Liz replied as she walked toward the door. What else could she do without seeming rude? It was dark as they walked along the winding garden path behind the house. The wind caused Liz's cap strings to flap, so she kept hold of them tightly in her hands. She recalled taking these walks with John hand in hand, watching as the ducklings swam behind their mothers, the daisies and sunflowers lining the grass walkway that seemed to go on forever. This had been John and her special place, and she was uncomfortable now walking here with another man. One she did not want to be with. Liz, I feel so grateful that after all these years something has brought us back together again. I've waited a very long time, and I don't want to waste any more time. Liz watched in horror as Ephraim faced her and reached for her hand. It was horrible. What could she do? Refuse his hand? She wanted to, but felt it would be too rude. She had to allow him to hold her hand. Liz, would you be my girlfriend? She opened her mouth to tell him the truth. Then he smiled and raised his hand. With that same hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something and then pressed it into her palm. It's a gift, he told her. At least he wasn't holding her hand anymore. She held it up to the light. It was a crystal heart. It's beautiful. It truly is, but I can't accept a gift. John's only just died and it's far too soon. Yeah, good. Let him down gently. Then he'd forget about her after several months had gone by. Surely you can understand, yeah? Liz stared as she watched all hope disappear from Ephraim's face. Oh. I am sorry, it's just when your mom called, she implied that it might be a good idea to not waste any time. She told me you were ready now. Not ready to marry, but ready to commit to that in the future. He nodded to her stomach. Nothing like a ready-made family for a man as old as me. And may we have many more. Liz stepped back in horror. No. He grinned and she couldn't help noticing he had a piece of spinach stuck between his front teeth. I know you women and the games you play. You don't have to do that with me. I like you. I'm sorry, Ephraim. I can't. I hope you didn't come all this way to ask me. Thinking once again that this used to be her and John's very special place, Liz felt tears start to well up in her eyes. She missed him now more than ever. I'm sorry, Ephraim. I wish you well. Please excuse me. She gave him back the crystal heart and ran back to the house. I'll wait for you, Liz. We can get married after the baby arrives if that's what you want. That made Liz run all the faster. She burst in through the back door and then through to the kitchen. Liz, what's wrong? Lucy asked as she rushed past them. Liz wiped the tears from her face and ran up the stairs to her room. She flopped down on her bed and the tears flowed harder. She could hear Lucy raising her voice downstairs, but she couldn't make out what she was saying. Minutes later, Lucy knocked on her door. Liz, it's me. Can I come in? Yeah. Liz wiped her face. Ephraim's gone. I watched him drive away. What happened out there? Was it Mom again? I've told her off for bringing him here. She doesn't know when to let something go. He asked me to be his girlfriend, Liz started. He was under the impression I'm desperate for a husband thanks to Mom. Lucy walked over and hugged Liz tight. I can't believe it. Lucy said, she's got some nerve. Ephraim Schrock is not the man for you. Lucy rubbed Liz's back. We'll figure this out. One day at a time. I'll talk to Mom and tell her never to do this again. Yeah. She listens to you, Lucy. I know. I told you, you need to be firm with her. And tell her never to feed our guests spinach, Liz said, remembering the spinach in his teeth. What? Lucy looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Liz shook her head. Nothing. Then she started to giggle at her own silly comment about the spinach, and of course she had to explain, and soon both of them were laughing until good tears ran down her face and Lucy's. Chapter 17. But the mercy of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting upon them that fear him, and his righteousness unto children's children. Psalm chapter 103 verse 17. The next morning Liz was determined to speak with Andrew. She set off early knowing he was an early riser. All farmers had to be. When she saw him walking out of his house, she hurried toward him and greeted him with a smile. Morning. Andrew looked up. Good morning, Lizzy. I was just about to go back inside and make some hot chocolate. Want to join me? I'd love to. They walked side by side. It's a lovely morning. Let's sit on the porch. When they got there, Liz sat down on one of the two chairs. The view's so nice from here. How have you been? Andrew asked quietly. I've been better this week. Keeping busy and not thinking about the future. Although it's harder now. I get tired more easily with the baby growing inside me. It surprised Liz how open she could be with Andrew. She had told him everything. She felt she didn't need to hold back with him. She shared with him and he shared with her. Andrew had never married and seemed to find peace in his farm and his animals. What have you been up to this week? She asked. Same old thing for me. Preparing new pastures, fixing fences, dredging. On Wednesday, I went to the farmer's market and bumped into an old friend. That was nice. An old friend? Yeah, she invited me over to dinner, but I declined. I'll go inside and make that hot chocolate now. Okay. Liz adjusted the cushion underneath her after Andrew had gone into his house. Who is this woman? She wondered. She'd grown up with Andrew, so did she know this woman who'd invited him to dinner? It was intriguing. Soon he was back, and carefully set 2 steaming mugs down on the small circular table between the 2 chairs. Thank you. It's very hot, he warned. Good. That's how I like it. Liz knew how shy Andrew was, and she wanted to help him as much as she could. Why did you decline? Is this old friend married? She asked in fun, knowing the answer already. No. I think she's interested in me, but I don't see it working out. She found it funny that Andrew was so honest and open. Not many people were like that nowadays. Andrew, how will you know unless you give it a go? Spend some time with her. We will see. Andrew laughed. You deserve to be happy, Andrew. Liz said. As do you, he replied, staring at her with his clear blue eyes. I found my happiness, but I lost it, and unfortunately I can never get him back again, Liz said. John was a good man. We shared many good talks about the sheep. Really? It wasn't the first time Andrew had mentioned the talks John and he had. Liz felt bad that John had never invited him to dinner. That's right. He told me of the struggles he was enduring. I hope everything is okay now, is it? Liz was shocked. John had never spoken of how close he and Andrew were. This made Liz feel bad for keeping her distance from Andrew. I am sorry that I didn't know you were so close. We weren't close friends exactly, but we shared a common interest, sheep. Then we eventually talked about increasing our income and the different markets for our produce. Then he told me about the financial problems. Liz picked up her mug and took a sip. He never told me of any financial struggles, and now, boom. We are going to lose the house and the farm, and there's nothing I can do. I'm so sorry to hear that. Hearing herself saying it as a fact made it all seem real. She was about to lose everything her husband had worked for. It was going to be ripped out from underneath her. I confess that I use Martin as a bookkeeper too, and he told me a little of what's going on. Lizzy, I would like to help you. I would like to. Liz's hand jerked, and she accidentally tipped the hot chocolate down herself and onto the porch. She stood up. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He stood. It's okay. I'll get a rag and fix this in no time. Sit and I'll make you another and we'll talk some more. Tears flowed down her face as she looked at her apron soiled with hot chocolate. I'll go, Andrew. Thank you for listening to me. She picked up the spilled mug and placed it upright on the table. I'm sorry for making a mess. That's what I'm good at doing. Making messes. She walked away. Wait, Lizzy. He caught up to her. No, she said as she kept walking. Please, I don't want you to see me cry. It's okay. He took hold of her arm and she stopped and faced him. Then she stepped into him, put her head on his chest and sobbed. He wrapped his arms around her and held her tight. She sobbed there for a moment, and he lowered his head, gently resting it atop hers. It felt so good to have the closeness of a man again. In his arms she was safe and felt as though she was home. She jumped away from him. She didn't want to feel this way about him and his strong arms. She backed away. I'm sorry. Don't go. She put her hands by her sides, grabbed handfuls of her long dress and lifted them slightly so she could move faster, and then she ran toward home. As soon as she was away from Andrew and out of his sight, she slowed to a walk. She'd only ever been held in John's arms. Her life now was one she hardly recognized, and she knew things were about to get a whole lot worse. When her house came into view, she saw a buggy pull up and then watched as her sister got out and threw the reins over the hitching post, all the while sobbing loudly. What now? She murmured to herself as she hurried toward Lucy. Lucy looked up at her when she was nearly at the house. Oh, Liz, he doesn't want to be with me. What do you mean? What happened? I told him he can marry me now, or that's it. Liz covered her mouth. You gave him an ultimatum? Lucy sniffed. Yeah, and do you know what he said? He said there are people in our lives that need us right now. That we can wait, and if I can't see that, then maybe we shouldn't be together anymore. Come inside. She looped her arm through her sister's and walked the distance to the house. Just as they were about to walk in the front door, Lucy asked, Do you think I'm selfish, Liz? Sometimes she did, but she couldn't upset her when she was so distraught. You've always been there for me. Remember, though, that Matthew has lost his only brother, his only sibling, and his parents the year before that. Having a wedding right now without them is probably a scary thing for him. Liz watched as Lucy took it in. You know what, Liz, you're right. That's why he keeps pushing the wedding off. I need to go and apologize to him. He promised me that it wouldn't be much longer, and that he nearly had enough saved for a deposit on a place of our own. I'm so stupid. Lucy turned and headed back to the horse and buggy. Thank you, Liz. Chapter 18. But God commendeth his love toward us in that, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Romans chapter 5 verse 8. Sunday morning came, and Liz was relieved to have a day of rest from many of the farm duties. The hired workers were there to feed and milk the sheep and the goats. Still, a minimum of work was done on Sunday, only what was truly necessary. She dressed the twins ready for the meeting. They looked so cute in matching black outfits, white shirts, and their little black hats. Her mother was already in the buggy waiting as Liz held the children's hands and walked toward the buggy. The meeting seemed to fly by. Her mom was walking the children out and Liz was walking behind when she heard someone frantically calling her name. Liz? She turned around to see Ephraim Schrock rushing toward her, his face flushed. Ephraim, how are you? I'll take the twins to the buggy. Her mother ushered the twins away, so now Liz was alone with Ephraim. I'm well, Liz. Are you coming to my Uncle Tom's auction? Liz had totally forgotten it was the next day. Yeah, we are. I'll see you there, Liz said with a nod as she started to walk away. Liz, Ephraim started and paused. Liz stopped. She had no choice but to hear him out. I wanted to let you know that right now might not be the right time for you, but if you change your mind, I will be here waiting for you. Liz looked over and saw her mother standing by the buggy. Their eyes met, and her mother quickly looked away. Ephraim, that's kind of you, but I'm just not interested. I'm sorry, Liz said firmly. I know you're not ready yet, but like I said, I'll be waiting. He gave Liz a wink and walked away. How awkward, Liz thought as she walked over to the buggy, all the while glaring at her mother. Not a word, Mom, she snapped, controlling her voice as much as she could so the twins who were already inside the buggy wouldn't hear. Liz's tummy started to churn as she walked into the garden on Uncle Tom's farm. People were laughing and talking, and the garden was set up so beautifully. A long table held all the food, white lanterns hung from the tall trees that surrounded them. Dogs barked and ran around, and children also were running around laughing and playing. Liz's nose filled with the delicious smell of baked goods that sat upon the long table that was set up. There were grilled chickens, cooked vegetables, roast pork, salads and raw vegetables, and then there was a smaller table filled with baked goods, homemade muffins, and fresh baked bread. The day was warm and the sunshine felt nice on Liz's skin as she walked around smiling at people, Marie walking 2 paces behind her with the twins. They saw a table and decided to sit down. Liz had only just sat down when she saw Ephraim Schrock walking toward her again. Liz, may I have this seat? He asked as he sat down beside her before she could respond. Hi Ephraim, what a lovely idea to combine a lunch with an auction, Marie said as she looked around enthusiastically. This was becoming too hard for Liz to bear. Why would he not get the hint? Liz, would you like to get some food with me? Ephraim asked. Hello Mom, Liz. Lucy said. Oh, and Ephraim, hello. She had approached the table with Matthew. Hello to the both of you, Ephraim said. I hope you'll enjoy the auction today. We'll have so many things to auction off thanks to the many kind donations. Liz was so thankful to be interrupted. Sorry Ephraim, I told Lucy and Matthew we'd eat together today if you don't mind, Liz said, rising to her feet. She hoped her mother would offer to look after the boys so she could make her move quickly. Liz? Marie snapped, did you thank Ephraim for having us as guests today? Liz looked at Ephraim and smiled. Thank you for having us, Ephraim. The pleasure is mine. We have invited everyone, though. If you'll excuse me, Lucy and I need to be over here. Watch the boys for me for a few minutes, Mom? Of course. Liz grabbed Lucy's arm and pulled her away, leaving Matthew to sit down with Ephraim, Mom, and the twins. Is Mom seriously still trying to set you up with him? Lucy asked as they filled their plates with food. Yes, she calmed down for a while, but I can tell she is still up to no good. How are you and Matthew? Did you sort everything out from the other day? I haven't had a chance to ask you, Liz asked. We did. He said we'd be married within the year. Lucy grinned. That's amazing, Lucy. I'm so happy for you. Liz, I know we don't have anything set in stone as of yet, but I wanted to ask if you'd be my attendant. Of course, Liz exclaimed as she put her plate down to give Lucy a hug. I feel so honored you asked. I also wanted to ask you about Andrew. Liz narrowed her eyes. What about him? I know he's been at the house quite a bit since John died and well, he's a friend. Matthew talks to me about everything and he thinks Andrew is sweet on you. Liz thought back to being in Andrew's arms and how good it had felt. He's just shy and hasn't found the right woman yet. He's not my type anyway, and it's way too soon. If we were right together, we had that chance many years ago. John would want you to be happy. I know, and I am happy. We'll be happy, I should say, if the bank leaves us alone. That's him. He's here. Liz turned around, and her stomach sank into her boots when she saw Andrew standing at the other side of the yard talking to a woman. Liz couldn't help but be curious as to who she was. Yeah, that's him. Liz turned around, sure her face was bright red. Let's go say hello, Lucy said. No, Lucy. Not now. He's got company. Maybe we shouldn't bother him. Oh yeah, Lucy replied. That girl is so pretty, she said as she stared at them across the way. Here he comes. He's looking right at you. Liz didn't want to see him again. Not after what had happened between them. Hello, Lucy and Liz. Liz spun around, smiling, but it wasn't just him. He had the woman with him. Good afternoon, Andrew, Lucy said. Hi, Liz murmured. This is my third cousin, Rachel. Hello, Rachel said, smiling at both of them. Rachel was slim with dark hair and dark eyes. Liz considered that she looked similar to herself. Lovely lunch, isn't it? Lucy said enthusiastically, clearly feeling the awkwardness of the situation. It is. Andrew nodded as he looked around. I haven't seen you around before, Rachel. Have you moved here? Lucy asked. I'm just in town to visit Andrew. I'm staying with the Bishop's family for a few weeks. Wonderful. You two must come over for dinner soon. Liz exclaimed, instantly regretting the invitation. I'd love that. Rachel smiled at her. How about a week from today, Liz said. I don't know if we can, Andrew replied. I'm sorry, Liz. We've got so many invitations. I'll have to check what day we're free. Oh. Liz didn't know what to say. He'd rejected her offer of a meal. Third cousins. He could marry his third cousin. There was nothing against that happening, and the two of them did look good together. If you do come, I'll bake my famous cheesecake, said Lucy, full of enthusiasm. Liz was grateful her sister had broken the tension of the awkward moment. Great. We'll see you then, maybe. Rachel looked at Andrew. There are some other people you must meet, Rachel. Nice to see you both again. Andrew tipped his hat to the two of them, and then he and Rachel walked away. Liz put her plate of food on the table. I've just lost my appetite. I'm not sure what just happened there. Lucy looked at the pair as they walked away. I guess we can cross him off Mom's list of possible husbands. That's a bit sad. I know you'd prefer him to Ephraim. Stop it. I'll take this food over to Mom, and then I'll come back and get some for the boys. I wouldn't miss being at that dinner for anything, you poor thing. Lucy laughed. Why would you do that to yourself? That looked painful. Did you really just dig yourself into that big a hole? I didn't expect that response. Not from him. Have you upset him? He seemed different somehow. Liz looked at Andrew and Rachel again. They did look like a good pair. Had she lost him? Another husband wasn't a practical choice despite what her mother said, but something inside her did not want him to marry Rachel or anyone. That night after the twins were in bed, Liz went downstairs to talk to Matthew and Lucy before they left. As soon as she sat down in the living room, her mother and Lucy jumped up and offered to do the after-dinner cleanup. What's more, they insisted that Liz was not to help them. She was more than fine with that. It had been a big day, and she couldn't wait to go to bed. Liz, I've been giving it a lot of thought, and I want to give you the money for the bank. She sat there and stared at him in disbelief. I couldn't take that from you. It's for you and Lucy and your house. I insist. No. I won't take it from you. This is your farm. John's farm. Take it for the sake of the boys. No. Don't say another word about it, Matthew. I forbid it. He frowned. But thank you. That means a lot. Take it for the boys, for their future. No. Not another word. Liz sat there wondering if this was the miracle for which she'd been praying, and now she'd just turned it down. She couldn't do that to her sister. If Lucy had to wait even longer to get married, she'd be miserable. It might even be the end of her relationship with Matthew, and that wouldn't be good. Matthew was the best man for Lucy. Just think about it, Liz, please. She nodded. I'll tell you what. I will think about it. And I'll pray about it. Good. Have you talked this over with Lucy? No. My decision has nothing to do with her. But you won't have your deposit money. I'll work something out to keep her happy. As soon as Lucy and her mother came back into the room, she made her excuses and went to bed. She had a lot to think about. Chapter 19. Owe no man anything but to love one another. For he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. Romans chapter 13 verse 8. The next day, Liz had worked hard since 5 in the morning. Just before lunchtime, when the twins were having a nap and Marie was resting, Liz walked into the house through the back door and spotted the freshly washed clothes that hadn't been pinned out yet. She grabbed the basket and walked to the line at the back of the house, hoping there was enough of the day left for the clothes to dry. She'd thought about Matthew's offer all night, and by morning she'd dismissed it. What if she couldn't pay Matthew back his money, and she ended up still losing the farm? It was too risky. Should you be doing any work at all? Liz turned around upon hearing the male voice. It was Andrew. She was shocked to see him there. He hadn't been to the house in weeks. She smiled at him. Of course I should be. I have to. I'm not sick, I'm just having a baby. He held up a thermos flask and 2 mugs. I brought some hot chocolate. If you can spare a moment for me. I do like your hot chocolate. Sure. I'll just finish pinning these last few things and we can have it on the balcony. She pointed toward the outdoor staircase leading up to the roof of the porch, which John had turned into an attractive railed sitting area. The view from the balcony was as beautiful as ever. Andrew sat next to Liz, and Liz noticed again how calming it was just being around him. Liz also noticed Andrew seemed different today. Is everything okay, Andrew? Then she had a horrible thought that he might be there to tell her he was getting married. Everything is fine, I guess. It's just, I don't want to bother you with my problems. Please, Andrew, you have heard all of my problems. Let me return the favor. Liz noticed this made Andrew feel a bit more comfortable. Well, it's about Rachel. Go on. We kept in contact over the years. I didn't think anything of it, just that we were friends, but her parents have sent her here. She wants to. I think she wants to marry me. Or at least she feels obligated to consider the idea. And you don't feel the same? Liz asked. I'm not getting any younger. Her parents are pressuring her, and mine have always been that way with me, but I ignore what they say. I've always admired the love my parents have for each other. My parents want me to find someone, of course, it's only natural. But they have such a special love for each other, and that is rare. And you can't bring yourself to marry someone you are not in love with? Liz asked. Exactly. But I'm getting older, and Rachel is hinting for a promise of something before she leaves. Maybe there is no love for me, and if I wait any longer, I may miss a chance at a family of my own. I know how you feel. Rachel seems like a nice woman. He swallowed hard and looked into her eyes. So you think I should go ahead with it? I can't tell you what to do. You've seen the pressure my mother's put on me, but I'd rather live alone with my children than welcome a man into my home that I do not love. I wish it was as easy as that for me. All I've ever wanted is to have a family of my own. You have 2 beautiful children and another on the way. I have no one to care for, no one to love. You must get so lonely. He smiled a little sadly. I found that being around a lot of people doesn't often help with that. She looked over her green fields, knowing exactly what he meant. A person could be alone in a crowd of people. You're a very deep thinker. He looked over at her. Am I? She nodded. Maybe I am. Is that a bad thing? Not at all. It's a good thing. Where would we be without thinking? He chuckled. I guess there's something wrong with too much thinking. He tapped on his forehead. Sometimes too much thinking is confusing. I found that thinking often leads to worrying. I think, what if this happens, or what if that happens? Then it leads to worry. Are you worried about the farm? He asked. I'm always worried about the farm ever since John died. I'm worried about how I will keep it. He moved around uncomfortably. And no solution has come up yet? No. I might be able to suggest a few changes. It's gone too far for that. We'll need more than a few changes to save the farm. It's going to happen. I have to face that now. It's just a matter of time. I do have Matthew to help me, and he is? Well, he's doing all that he can. Okay. The offer is there if you ever need it. I won't ask again, but all you have to do is ask me. Thank you, I appreciate it. You've been a good friend. He drank another mouthful of hot chocolate and looked at her. We were good friends once, you and I. We were. I've got fond memories of you and me in the meadows on those gorgeous afternoons. He took off his hat and smoothed down his sandy brown gold-flecked hair and shook his head a little. What happened with us? Where did I go wrong? She knew what he meant, but she wasn't ready to talk about it. I don't know what you mean. We were just friends. I'm sorry if I ever made you think there was anything more than that. His heart sank. He knew it was useless. She couldn't say it any more plainly, and a man didn't need to be hit over the head twice. It's not your fault at all, Lizzy. It's my stupid fault. Way back then, I thought things for you and me would have a different outcome. I did think your friendship was something more, that it would develop into something one day. She admired his honesty and his openness. Not many men would be so honest about their feelings. I'm sorry if I ever hurt you. That's the very last thing I ever wanted to do. He shook his head. As the thinking man that I am, naturally I've given it a lot of thought. It wasn't you who hurt me, it was my own expectations. I've come to realize that it's our expectations that often let us down in this world. If we never expected anything, we'd never be disappointed, would we? He smiled at her and she smiled back. I guess you're right. She swallowed hard. I thought I'd grow old with John. Silly me. I had an old aunt who always used to say, if God spares me, at the end of everything she said. I'll see you next week if God spares me. I guess it's the same as saying if God wills it. We do take so much for granted. I'm going to change that from right now. Liz, don't be hard on yourself. It's reasonable to expect you'd have had a lot of years with John. He was still so young when he died. Her bottom lip quivered and a tear trickled down her cheek. She placed her mug down on the table, embarrassed about crying. She went to turn away, but he took hold of her hand. I wish I could do something for you, Lizzy, to take away your pain. I'll be better in time, that's what everyone tells me. I suppose it's true. How can I ever forget him? I can't. Of course you can't. You shouldn't. The twins have exactly the same color eyes as he did. She shook her head. They look so much like him. And I feel as though he's looking back at me every time I'm looking at them. Then they are a wonderful reminder. You shouldn't forget him. I hope no one's told you that. She looked across at him, grateful for his words and his company. Then she looked down at her hand that he was holding. She brought his hand up to her lips and kissed it, showing how much she appreciated him. I'm sure you won't miss out on love, Andrew, if you follow your heart. And what if I followed my heart, and it has already led me somewhere to someone? He stood, their hands still clasped, and pulled her to her feet. He looked down into her eyes, and she was frozen in that moment. Part of her wanted to be held in his arms like before, and part of her told her that was betraying John. But John was gone and she was alive. Here she was, so close to Andrew's strong body that she could feel his racing heart. She took a deep breath and looked into his eyes. She'd missed feeling like a woman. Should that part of her die and be buried with John? She was still very much alive. Slowly he lowered his head to hers, and she wondered how his lips would feel. All she wanted was a tiny piece of happiness, something just for herself. Closing her eyes, she tilted her head slightly, and then she tasted his warm lips. When they heard the rattling of a buggy, they jumped apart. It was Matthew. She touched her fingertips to her mouth, not sorry for that moment of madness. I'm really sorry, Liz. I hope I haven't misled you in any way. It was never my intention. Misled her. Before she knew what was happening, Andrew was walking down the stairs. Her hand went to her heart. Didn't he like her? Why had he held her in his arms just now? Their lips had touched. Was he now going to go off now and marry Rachel? She wanted to run after him and find out, but she'd kept him away for so long she knew she didn't have the right. Hey Liz. What's happening? Matthew said, smiling as he walked to the bottom of the stairs. She couldn't speak. Her eyes were on Andrew striding away from her. Chapter 20. For brethren, ye have been called unto liberty. Only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. Galatians chapter 5 verse 13. Liz kept staring at Andrew until he disappeared. Liz? Startled from her swirling thoughts, she glanced down at Matthew. Yeah. I said, what's happening? She looked at Matthew and turned around to see that Andrew had forgotten his flask. I was just sitting here with Andrew, and then he had to leave suddenly. Liz picked up Andrew's thermos and the 2 mugs and walked down the stairs. Matthew handed her a letter. Someone just handed me this. He handed over an envelope addressed with red writing. She knew it wasn't going to be good. Who handed it to you? I was just turning into the drive, and your mail carrier was just about to put it into the mailbox. He saw me and asked if I was Mr. Lehman. I said yes, without thinking he meant was First John, so he handed it to me. Liz took the envelope and they walked into the house. I think this is it, Matthew. I fear it is. Sit with me while I open it. Do you want me to open it? He asked as they both sat down. No. Liz took a deep breath and opened the letter. It was a repossession letter. Next week they had to be out. Liz flung the letter as far as it would go, which, being paper, wasn't very far. Having it official came as a relief. She couldn't go on. She had been going non-stop, trying to keep herself busy in order to not focus on the harsh reality of what was about to happen. Are you okay? What is it? He leaned over and plucked the letter from the floor and read it. He looked up at her. I'm going to pay this debt for you and the children. You will keep your farm. You're not going to lose it. How could she accept such an offer? Matthew, that's so kind, but I could never accept that kind of money. You can. Was this God's way? God's answer to prayer? No, Matthew, I can't accept that. Especially when I know you and Lucy are saving to get married. Yeah, but sometimes these things happen, and that's what family is for. This farm reminds me of John and all his work, and I couldn't bear to see it go either. Liz didn't know what to say. Will you tell Lucy you've given us the money? Not for now. She doesn't know how much I've saved. We won't have to wait much longer, even if you take this money. I'm not taking no for an answer. I'm going to make the transaction tomorrow, with or without your approval. Liz burst into tears. I can't accept you giving us the money, but I can accept you lending it to us. Please. Liz, we're family, there's no need for that. Please, Matthew, I have to repay you or I will not accept it. Let's talk about it in a few years. 2 years from now, and we'll assess things then. Okay? Thank you, Matthew. I don't know what we would do without you. Now give me a hug. She stood and then he rose to his feet and they hugged. While they were hugging, Liz said, My family has a forever home, that's all I care about. All thanks to you. Lucy stood at the kitchen door staring into the living room, at her sister and her fiancé locked in an embrace. She couldn't believe her eyes. Neither of them had seen her, but that didn't matter. Now she knew the truth of what was going on. Her sister had stabbed her in the back, and her fiancé had betrayed her in the worst way possible. Why did Liz think she could take everything from her? Why was the man she was in love with in the arms of her sister? It was all too much. She walked quietly to the back door and ran away from the house. She'd lost 2 important people in her life. Now she only had her mother. It was clear that neither of them cared about her. She kept asking and asking Matthew when they would get married, and he kept telling her it wasn't far away, but now it was clear that it was a long way away, forever, and from what she just witnessed, he was in love with Liz and he was too cowardly to tell her. And that was the real reason he was spending so much time at her place. He wasn't just helping out his sister-in-law. No. He was trying to take his brother's place in every possible way. Was Liz so desperate for a husband with the baby coming that she'd steal her man? Was that what had happened? Or had Matthew been secretly in love with Liz for years? Not knowing what else to do with herself, Lucy ran through the fields and then threw herself down amongst the reeds near the pond. Now, getting married would never happen for her. She had bypassed so many young men waiting for Matthew. She lay flat on her tummy and sobbed until she noticed a pair of muddy boots in front of her. She was sure they hadn't been there before. The tears caught in her throat. Her eyes followed the muddy boots upward, to the worn-out trousers, to the billowing white shirt, and then up further until she saw Andrew Miller's concerned face. She sat up. "Oh, I'm sorry. Am I on your land?" He crouched down. "What's upset you so much?" "You won't believe what I've just seen." She got to her feet and he stood too. She'd tell him what she had seen, and then he'd no longer like Liz. It was obvious he was in love with her. "Matthew and I were supposed to be getting married, and I've just seen Liz in his arms." "I'm sure there's a reason." "Well, yeah, there is. They love each other. He's supposed to love me, and he's gone behind my back. She's my sister." He shook his head. "Are you sure?" She brushed away her tears with her fingertips and then she touched his arm. "They don't deserve us, Andrew." He frowned just slightly, questions in his eyes. "I know you're in love with Liz. Everyone probably knows it, but she's chosen Matthew. My Matthew." "There must be some mistake," he repeated. "I saw it with my own eyes and heard it with my own ears. There is no mistake about it." He was devastated. He was losing Liz for a second time today, and it was just as much a shock as last time. They'd kissed barely. Liz hadn't held back, and if it hadn't been for Matthew showing up, they would have kissed properly. "Liz doesn't deserve you, Andrew, not a man like you. You're so handsome, you're so." She stepped in close to him and she stared into his eyes, and then her gaze dropped to his lips. She stepped in even closer, holding onto his gaze, and then she slipped her arms around his waist. Lucy hoped he'd bring her towards him and kiss her. Any other man would've. Just as she had her back arched and had closed her eyes waiting for that kiss, he stepped back. "This is not right, Lucy. Is what Liz and Matthew doing right? Maybe that's what they both want. She didn't choose me years ago, so it's no surprise that she doesn't want me now." "But what about me?" Lucy whined. "Matthew and I had plans. He made promises to me. Best you go and talk to him about it. Knowing Matthew, there'll be a reasonable explanation." He didn't really believe it, but he hoped so with all his heart. "No. I don't want either of them anywhere near me ever again. Don't you understand, Andrew? Why aren't you upset? I saw them in each other's arms. Matthew loves her now. He's given her all his money and that proves it. I'm sure there must be some mistake." "No, there's not." She turned away from him and marched away with her fingers curled into fists. She sobbed and he caught up to her and lifted her chin and looked into her eyes. "There will be someone for you." Lucy wasted no time. This time she wasn't going to be coy. She stepped in and pressed her lips against his. Chapter 21. But without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 6. Andrew jumped back in fright. "Stop it." She gasped in horror at his response. "This is not the answer. You can't replace one man with another." "I'm sorry." She ran away crying. "Lucy, come back. It's okay." Now he felt horrible. She wouldn't have normally done that, he was sure. Lucy was just upset. Liz walked out of her house to find Andrew. She had to tell him about the good news. Once the bank was satisfied, she'd make a proper plan so she could keep up repayments and pay her brother-in-law back. Andrew's ideas for increasing profits would be very welcome now. She caught sight of him in the field, and was just about to yell out to him when she saw her sister up ahead of him. He was walking fast to catch up with Lucy. What was going on? She couldn't work it out. She moved behind a tree and watched. Then he called out Liz's name and she swung around. It was then Liz saw her sister's ruddy face. The only time her face looked like that was when she was crying. Liz held herself back from running to her. It was odd to see the two of them together. They were talking like there was something between them. It was almost as if they were having a lover's spat. She was too far from them to hear what was being said, but she could see their body language. "It's okay, Lucy," Andrew said. "I'm just embarrassed. I've made a fool of myself. Of course you wouldn't like me because you're in love with her. Kindly don't mention that to her or we'll both be embarrassed. The three of us would be." Lucy smiled. "Then I won't be the only one." "True. Lizzy and I are only meant to be friends, I'm sure of it. If we were meant to be anything else, it would have happened a long time ago. I'm sorry for you then. And I'm sorry for myself. Matthew told me he'd marry me when he had a large deposit saved for a house. He said he was almost there, and all along I had no idea he was in love with Liz." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Are you sure that's what has happened? You can't know if you don't ask him. Everyone will know soon enough. They'll wait a suitable time, of course. Can't marry your late husband's brother too soon, you know. What would people say? How long would they wait? At least a year, I'd say. After the baby's born." He slowly nodded. "You won't tell anyone we kissed, will you?" she asked. He frowned. "We didn't. Our lips touched. That was an accident on my part. Am I so unattractive, Andrew?" She took a step toward him and he took a step back. "You are very beautiful, but there's the matter of the man you're going to marry. You need to get things straight with him. When you hear things from his own lips, then you can believe it. It could be a simple misunderstanding. I don't know. It's possible. And likely. Do you think so?" He nodded. "I do. I could almost guarantee it, I believe it so much." "Thank you, Andrew. You're so wise." She grabbed his arms, leapt up and kissed him on the cheek. Then she ran in the direction of Liz's house without looking back. Andrew laughed at her and shook his head. Then his thoughts turned to Liz. What if Liz was in love with Matthew and Lucy was right? It would make sense. Matthew was always at the house. Suddenly Andrew felt sick to his stomach. He turned around and headed to his sheep. He always felt better around his bleating flock. He didn't have any children, but he had his flock. Liz leaned against the tree. Her sister had kissed Andrew after she'd been crying. What did it all mean? Did Andrew have two women interested in him? It disturbed her that Lucy had never mentioned anything to her. Poor Matthew. She'd been certain that Andrew liked her, especially after what had happened on her balcony. Now she knew he didn't, and they could never be friends again like they once were. She missed their friendship already. Whatever was going on with her sister was none of her business, she decided. She'd mind her business and concentrate on getting the thing with the bank straightened out. She started walking back to the house and then stopped still. No. She had to know what was going on. She was protective of her sister. Knowing she wouldn't get a straight answer from Lucy, she followed Andrew. Andrew. He spun around, his face flushed. Hello, Liz? I just saw the two of you just now. Oh. He looked down at the grass. It was nothing. You of all people. I trusted you. Don't you know that Lucy is getting married to Matthew? Are they getting married, though? He seems in no hurry about it. Liz's mouth dropped open. I didn't mean it like that. Liz shook her head. There's no other way to mean it. You think that he's taking his time, so it's okay for you to step in between them? It's not me who's stepping between them. I've seen that you and Matthew spend more time together than Lucy does with Matthew. Liz put her hands on her hips. Exactly what are you saying? Matthew is taken with you. It's plain to see. Can't you see it? I think Lucy can. Oh, so that's it? You take the opportunity to swoop in? I saw the two of you together. There's no excuse for that. I expected more from you, you of all people. Liz, it's not Lucy I'm interested in. That makes it even worse. She stared at him. Where had the sweet man gone that she once knew? The man standing in front of her was someone she didn't even recognize anymore. Then it struck her. That was why he'd never married. He liked to go out with different women, and maybe women who had boyfriends or fiancés. There was Rachel herself and now her sister that he was stringing along. Let me explain. Liz put up her hand. No need. I can see clearly the type of man you are. Goodbye. She walked 2 steps away and then turned around. Kindly stay away from my sister and from me. Wait, Liz. She kept walking, and when he kept calling her name, she placed her hands over her ears. She was through with him. Chapter 22. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Exodus chapter 20 verse 12. Several more months had passed. The farm was recovering thanks to Matthew's money, and to both Matthew and Liz doing a lot of work on the farm. But Martin said it would be a whole year longer before Liz could start to pay back the money she owed Matthew. It was a Tuesday morning when Marie had taken the twins to play with the other young children, whose mothers were at the weekly quilting bee. Liz was busy in her production room making cheese when Lucy ran in. Oh, I didn't even hear your buggy, Liz said. From the look on Lucy's face, she guessed what her sister was going to say. There was nothing else that would make Lucy this happy. It's finally happened. Matthew has set a date for the wedding. That's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. Lucy threw her arms around Liz's neck. After a moment, Liz stepped back. I'm glad he has enough money. Liz hoped he'd told Lucy that he'd loaned her a sizable amount. Oh, you don't know about that yet? What about it? Lucy leaned forward and whispered, the money Matthew gave you wasn't from him. Someone asked Matthew to say it was from him so you wouldn't find out. Liz swallowed hard. If the money hadn't come from Matthew, who had it come from? Not Ephraim, no, because he lived in a converted barn. The bishop or one of the elders? Then it struck her. The only person she knew who might have that kind of money was Andrew. Don't be angry. It is? Lucy nodded. When did you find out? Just today, when Matthew officially asked me to marry him. She wrapped her arms around Liz's neck once again. I should be angry with you for taking the money when you thought it was Matthew's, but I'm not. How could I be angry when I'm about to be Mrs. Matthew Lehman? We'll have a house, and soon we'll have so many babies running around the place. She jumped back, clapping her hands together. Oh. I can't wait. Liz was in shock over Andrew having given her the money. She had to talk it over with him. He had to be paid back. Anyway, what happened to you and Andrew? He used to be over here every day. Won't you tell me what happened? Lucy had tried to find out many times before if they'd had some kind of an argument. Liz had always denied it. I saw him with you. He was trying to come between you and Matthew. She eyed her sister, knowing Lucy was probably partly responsible. Oh. Lucy looked away. What happened with you and him? Does Andrew like you too? No. He doesn't. I saw you and him kissing. If you don't like him, why did that happen? Ack, this is embarrassing. I'll tell you, but don't tell anyone, ever. Go on. It was my fault. I kissed him and he pushed me away. I was frustrated that day. Frustrated with you, with Matthew, and with my life. I saw you and Matthew hugging, and then I found out you were only thanking Matthew for the money. But that day, I had this crazy idea if Andrew liked me, we could marry and have a family. I didn't know why Matthew was taking so long. After that, Matthew and I talked. He assured me he had the money. I didn't ask, but I suspected that someone else gave you that money. Then you found out today for sure. Yeah. Today he told me it was Andrew. Liz sighed. I've been a fool. I saw you and Andrew together and thought, why didn't you ever say anything to me? Liz shook her head. What was the point? I saw what I saw. You owe Andrew a lot, and I'm not just talking money. I do. Take over here, would you? I want to go and see him now. Sure. Liz wasted no time in taking off her work apron and handing it to Lucy. Then she hurried out the door. Andrew had been well practiced at putting Liz out of his mind. It wasn't easy when he saw her at the Sunday meetings, or drove past her farm in a buggy and saw her with the sheep. He'd done his best to make sure she was happy and well cared for. That money he gave the bank in her name had saved the farm. He knew that because Martin, his bookkeeper, and hers told him so. He couldn't believe his eyes when he looked up from repairing a fence and saw Liz walking toward him. The hammer slipped from his fingers and he stared at her. She was a beautiful sight to behold on such a cold and miserable gray day. It was as though an angel had fallen from heaven and had come to brighten his day. Her smile warmed his heart and made him forget about the numbness in his fingers that the bitterly cold wind had caused. He knew she was coming to mend their rift. It had to happen sometime, he had been sure of that, and he'd waited for this day to come. His gaze fell to her rounded belly. She had to be only days away from giving birth. More than anything, he'd like to be involved in the twins' lives and in the life of the new baby. He could be like an uncle to them. This time he had to make Liz listen. He'd overcome his shyness and be bold. Women were his only problem. He wasn't shy when it came to anything else in life. He bent down to get his hammer, while trying to put the right words together in his mind. Liz wanted to run to him. She'd missed him. And she'd misjudged him. What would he think of her stupidity? She wrapped her warm coat further around her to block out the wind, but it no longer closed around her belly. He walked to her, and they met each other along the fence line. "How have you been, Liz? You look wonderful." She smiled and looked down at herself. "I'd say I look huge, but I'm okay. I'm feeling like a fool. Lucy told me about what happened that day when I saw the two of you together. I tried to tell you. I know. There's something else I found out." "What's that?" "It was you who paid back that loan. It wasn't Matthew." He rubbed his jaw and looked down. "Just say it, Andrew." "It was me. I didn't want you to know." "Why not?" "I didn't want you to feel you owed me or anyone else anything." Tears came to her eyes, but she didn't want to cry. Not now. She had so much more to say to him. "Where? How did you get all that money?" "I bought a couple of places and sold them for a profit when I was younger. A lot younger. I had the money sitting there. I knew you wouldn't take it from me, but I thought you'd possibly take it from Matthew. I will pay you back." "Liz, you don't need to pay me back. It gives me comfort to know that you and the boys are happy." "You are happy, aren't you?" "I am. The boys just turned 4 and they're growing up so fast. They talk so well now. It must be wonderful to have them. To have a family." She nodded. "Whatever happened to Rachel?" "I know she went home." "Nothing happened, and that's why she left." His lips curved upward. She wanted him to take her in his arms, but he wasn't making a move. She couldn't blame him, after she'd always kept him at a distance. "One day soon, I'd like to talk with you about how I can make the farm more profitable. You never did tell me any of the ideas you've got." "I'm always thinking up things and listening to other farmers." "Good." When he didn't say anything further, she feared it was over between them before it had even begun. "I better get back before they send out a search party." She put her hands on her tummy. "Mom's been watching me like a hawk. Baby's due any time now." "In that case, let me escort you home. I won't have Marie saying I didn't take care of you when you were on my property." Liz forced a laugh. "That would be good." As they walked, he asked, "Are you hoping for a girl?" "I don't care. Anything God gives me is fine with me." After they walked a few moments in silence, Liz said, "Andrew, I owe you everything." "No, you don't. I never wanted you to find out about the money. It's too much to just give someone just like that. You're not just someone, you're you, and you're special to me. I'm free to do what I want with my own money." She stopped walking and looked up into his face. "I'm special to you." "You are." He touched her on the arm, and she knew by the look on his face that he was going to kiss her, and she wasn't going to stop him. "There you are, Liz." They both turned to see a breathless Marie hurrying toward them. Where were you? She snapped at Liz. I was just talking to Andrew. Hello, Andrew, Marie said as she took hold of Liz's hand. You must not overexert yourself, and you could catch your death of cold. Marie looked back at Andrew. Come for dinner with us tonight? You're looking a bit thin in the face. Mom. Well, he is. No, thank you. Another time, maybe. Okay. If you'll excuse us, I have to get her home and have her put her feet up and sit in front of the fire before her ankles puff up again. Could her mother be more embarrassing? Bye, Andrew, Liz said as she was being dragged away. I'll see you soon, I hope, Liz. As soon as Liz walked through the door of her house, a flood of warmth enveloped her legs and lower regions. Could it be? She looked down. Mom, look. My water broke. Chapter 23. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear, because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. 1 John chapter 4 verse 18. Marie looked down at the floor and then looked back at her. Is it? Yeah. Marie screamed. Oh. I must call Liz. Her mother was always getting their names mixed up. I'm right here, Mom. I mean Lucy and of course Amy. Oh dear. I'll call Amy first and then call Lucy to mind the boys. Then she yelled at the top of her lungs. Boys, get your bags packed ready for staying at your aunt's. Your mother is having the new baby soon. Liz let her mother run around in circles, wondering what to do first, while she grabbed a couple old towels and sat on the couch. The birth could be hours away. The twins' labor had been a long one, and she was expecting the same for this one. There was only one baby this time, though, and that wasn't the only difference. Last time their father was at the birth, this time he couldn't be. The boys ran down the stairs with their tiny bags bundled in their arms, and asked Liz all kinds of questions about the birth that she wasn't ready to answer and they weren't ready to hear. 6 o'clock the next morning, Liz was in her bed cradling her baby girl in her arms. The birth had been easier and quicker than with the boys. While the midwife was cleaning up, Marie was fussing over her and the baby. Liz decided to call her baby Lydia. It was a name that John had liked when they were thinking up baby names for the twins, before they knew they were going to be boys. Marie leaned over. She's beautiful, Lizzy. She's adorable. The most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Can you believe how tiny and perfect she is? I can't. John would have loved her. I know. As she stared at her precious baby, she felt awful for not being joyful at the start of her pregnancy. She had thought it would be too awful and sad to raise a child without a father. But little Lydia had 2 older brothers, a fanatical grandmother, a crazy aunt, and they had their Uncle Matthew. Thanks to Andrew, they had their farm. That was a pretty good start for a baby girl. It was a week later when she saw Andrew again. He'd come with a large bundle of flowers, and told Marie he was there to visit Lizzy and the baby. Marie brought him into the living room. Lydia was sleeping in the crib next to the couch. Thank you for coming and for the flowers. I saw a little bit of them before Mom took them to put in water. She's so excited. I know. Can I see her? He pointed at the crib. Of course you can. She stood up and pulled the tiny sheet down so he could see all of Lydia's face and her tiny hands. Incredible, he said as he looked at her in wonder. You make beautiful babies, Lizzy. She giggled. Have you been keeping well? Yeah. They both sat down. Marie said she's making hot tea, he told her. Ah, good. You've been on my mind, Andrew. I have? She nodded. It's about the money. I will pay you back. I just need help to work it all out. As you know, Martin's away on a cruise. I know. That's what we get for having an Englisher for a bookkeeper. She smiled. I guess so. Tell me just one idea you've had so I can think about something else. Mom won't let me out that front door. I'm stuck inside the house. You need to rest. Don't you start. He grinned at her, and at that moment she wanted to go back in time to when they were younger. He didn't say how he felt back then, but maybe she should have. One of them should have. Would they be forever dancing around what was staring them in the face? One idea is, if we combine our farms and resources, there's the possibility of gaining so much more income. She drew in a quick breath. Are you saying what I think you're saying? He frowned. We combine our resources. He was so shy. Maybe she had to help him. Tell me more about this combining of resources. Sure. I've been talking to quite a few farmers, and we all agree that it would take over 700 ewes to make a viable cheese production. There are huge markets for sheep cheese. I know. This was not the answer she was looking for. Would I be able to keep my goats too? We could do that if we combined together and split the profits. She'd gotten her hopes up when he talked about combining farms. She thought he was going to propose combining their lives. It might have been too soon, but in another way she felt like she'd been waiting a lifetime. What did she have to do to let him know she was interested in him? Do you want to hear this now? I do. I'm just a little tired. We'll talk about it some other time then. I'd like that. Marie brought them the tea items on a tray, and then disappeared into the kitchen. He leaned forward and poured the tea and handed her a cup with a piece of lemon. You remembered I like lemon in my tea. That's the kind of thing that's hard to forget. Do you remember how I have mine? Weak and black. That's right. See? It's just one of those things that people remember. In 2 weeks Matthew and Lucy will be married, Liz said. I know. That came up fast. Time travels quickly sometimes. He took a sip of tea, and then leaned forward and put the teacup down on the table. Then he got up to take the teacup gently from her, and he placed that on the table as well. She looked up at him in surprise, and then he sat down next to her. Lizzy, I don't know how you're going to react to this, but... Go on. I think you're the most wonderful and beautiful woman in the world. When we were younger, I hoped we'd marry one day, and then you left me suddenly. She was tempted to explain but kept quiet to let him finish. The best thing I could hope for in this life is for you to be my wife. If you refuse me, I'll just keep loving you but from a distance. Well, from next door. He picked up her hand and held it tight. Lizzy, would you be my wife? She was speechless. She had thought he would never ask her. You want to marry me? It would make me the happiest man in the world to have you to come home to, and have the boys to raise and this little one. Tears stung behind her eyes. It felt so right, even if it wasn't like the romantic moments where they nearly kissed. This was real. How would this work? Where would we live? Just say yes, Lizzy. We can live anywhere we want to live. She nodded and then laughed. Yeah, I will marry you, Andrew. Their lips met in a kiss. Then they heard Marie scream and she ran into the room. Did I hear right? Marriage. Yeah, you heard it here first. He laughed and he didn't let go of Liz's hand. She's agreed to marry me, Marie, and I won't let her change her mind. No problem there, I won't change it, Liz said. The boys will be so happy. Wait. Now I'll have 2 weddings to plan. 2 of my doctors are getting married. Can I tell someone? Who can I tell? No one, Andrew said. I haven't told the bishop yet. I've only just found out myself. I'll just go out to the barn and call Lucy, but I'll not mention a thing. She headed out the door. Andrew laughed. She's going to tell her, isn't she? I'd say so. She'll find it hard to keep something like that to herself. I've always loved you, Lizzy. I can talk to you about anything and feel totally comfortable with you, but back then, I don't know. I can't help feeling that I should have said something. She looked into his beautiful blue eyes. It's okay, Andrew. It was all meant to happen as it did. We are here now, we're together, and we have the rest of our lives. I couldn't be happier. Liz rested her head on his shoulder. Me too. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since John had died, she felt truly safe and protected. This was a man she could trust with her whole heart. And she did. Andrew knew he'd been rewarded with his heart's desire. He hadn't wanted to marry just for the sake of being married, because he knew that wouldn't be enough to make him happy. To have a proper marriage in the sight of God, he had to have a woman he could treasure and cherish. Liz was the only woman for him. Andrew insisted on getting married as soon as possible, and Liz agreed. They combined their farms and lived in Andrew's house. Marie sold her little house and stayed on in Liz's old home where she'd be close to them. Close enough to look after the children while Liz made her sheep's milk and goat's milk cheeses and yogurts. After Andrew and Liz had been married 2 years, they had a daughter, Ivy. It was a month later that Lucy and Matthew had twin girls. 2 years after that, Andrew and Liz were blessed with baby Benjamin. Life was good. For Liz, marrying Andrew had taken nothing away from the love she'd had for John, laying to rest something she'd feared. Andrew spoke often of his affection for John, and they made sure the twins and Lydia knew of their father. The worst time in Liz's life had been those months after John had died. She was soon to find out the words "it's always darkest before the dawn" were true. She had turned herself away from fear, opened herself to love, and she'd been greatly rewarded. Her wounded heart had healed. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. Ephesians chapter 5 verse 25. Thank you for listening to Amish Widow's Heart.